Before we begin, I want to throw up a spoiler warning for everyone. While I don't drill down into every tiny detail of each game, I do go over the broad strokes of their stories and how they end. So if you're just looking for a recommendation, then yes, these games are awesome, if a little flawed here and there, and Dragonfall is my favourite. So if you only buy one, then get that one. To everyone else, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the video. If you're listening with headphones, then I apologise for any extra background noise. It's very windy here at the moment, and it was basically a choice between record with the wind outside or not record at all. I've done the best I can to keep the noise down, but there's a limit to what can be done. If you enjoy, please remember to like and comment. If you're a tabletop Shadowrunner, maybe share a story of one of your funnier runs for us all to enjoy. And I have a Blue Sky here, a Facebook here, and a Patreon and channel memberships here. Okay, let's do this. Shadowrun is a tabletop RPG that smashes together the ideas of Tolkienesque high fantasy with William Gibson style cyberpunk. While it might seem at a glance that these are two things that should never be seen in the same room as each other, once they come together, the fit is so perfect that it should have been obvious from the get-go. I'm not going to attempt to cover the origins of the cyberpunk genre here, but if that is something you'd like to know more about, then run along and check out one or all of these videos in this series, if you aren't one of the millions who've already done so by this point anyway. No doubt someone somewhere has done an equally enviable job of dissecting the creation of Middle-earth and Dungeons & Dragons as well, so I'll leave it to you to hunt those things down. There's already a hell of a lot to talk about here, just with Shadowrunning as it is. Our story begins with Jordan Weissman, who co-founded the publishing house FASA with his partner Al Ross Babcock out of his basement in 1980. Yes, I did just butcher saying Babcock several times. The idea was simple at the time, to write and publish adventures for the Traveller role-playing game and get them distributed nationally. From these humble beginnings, the company grew, and in 1989, Weissman developed the original Shadowrun rule set and setting, and published it through said company. Since we're primarily here to talk video games, I'm not going to go into the various editions and so on, as I really am not the person to do that. Despite being a member of a couple of tabletop roleplay groups in the past, I've never actually run the Shadows there myself. What's important to note is that, along with the success of the tabletop game, video games were developed and published on both the Sega Megadrive, the Super Nintendo, and the Sega Mega CD of all things. I grew up through the 16-bit generation and have a lot of nostalgia for a variety of games of that era. Some of them really hold up even now, but these weren't games I played at the time. I've put a few hours into each, and while they are interesting artifacts of their era, especially the Japanese-only visual novel for the CD, I don't think we need to say much more about them other than that they exist. I'm not saying that they're bad, but I think that these reviews would be better handled by someone who actually played them at the time. What's important for our story though is that prior to FASA's closure in 2001, the gaming rights to Shadowrun had been sold to Microsoft, which is how this game happened. The Xbox 360 Shadowrun is another interesting artifact of its time, and similar to games like Resident Evil Outbreak, even has a fairly dedicated fanbase, keeping the game alive and kicking years after all the official servers were taken offline. Again though, beyond nodding to its existence, there's very little else I can say about it that's good or bad, as this just isn't my kind of game. I recall at its launch it was one of the only 360 games that had PC and 360 crossplay, which is pretty cool, but again, there are better people than I to cover this one. For now though, let's talk a little bit more about the story and the setting. Shadowrun takes place in a kind of alternate timeline. Sure, in 1980, events of the 2010s and onwards were a pure vision of the future, but in the 2020s, as I write this, they form an alternative history that leads to a completely different future. In this timeline, technology develops in a noticeably different direction. Rather than the Star Trek route of having small rectangles that fit into the palm of our hand, that can access literally all of the information in the world, complete with AI librarians to help sift through it, the merging of man and machine went a step further, with computers that are connected directly to our brains, an internet that is a full sensory interactive virtual illusion accessed via neural jacks, and cybernetic body parts that can replace the weak and frail flesh with hardened steel, capable of performing feats far beyond what any normal human is able to do, and able to conceal a huge variety of lethal weapons within them. Beyond this utility though, there is also the aesthetic. Body modification in the form of tattoos, piercings, extravagant hair, and other things like scarring were a massive part of the original punk movement. So the cyberpunk isn't just equipping themselves to fight in a darker future, they're making a statement about their identity while they do it. While in our timeline, YouTube Shorts and TikTok provide us with an endless string of fast dopamine hits, here SimSense technology allows people to record entire sensory and emotional experiences and distribute them to the world, providing consumers with a fully immersive and interactive dream, allowing them to live other lives, and thanks to a black market where snuff is recorded and sensations are even amplified, they can experience unimaginable highs and or suffer the most agonizing pain, all from the safety of their own couch. All of this is peddled by megacorps, companies so wealthy and powerful that they are their own governing bodies, complete with private armies and enclaves for their wage slave employees. These corpos pillage the planet for its resources to create their products to sell to their drones, while using cheap entertainment and misinformation to keep them docile and subservient. This is a world of massive inequality, where billions slave away for crumbs while a few mighty individuals sit atop hordes of undeserved wealth and count themselves among the gods, as they weave grand designs for the entire world about them, sacrificing thousands if not millions of lives in a single chess move if they think it will serve them in the long run. At worst, all of this sounds simply derivative of the Cyberpunk RPG that had been released by Telsorian Games only a year prior, if not outright lifted from Gibson's Sprawl Trilogy, with terms like The Matrix, Razor Girl, and Street Samurai all finding their way into the rulebooks and the setting. So what sets this one apart? Well, on January 27th, 2012, about 2 weeks before the release of the Silent Hill HD collection, the dragons returned to the world, and magic woke up. I'm afraid you're going to have to buy the Shadowrun core rulebook, or at least check a helpful wiki to get the full rundown of these events, though the important lore points are explained in the course of playing some of these games. In short though, dragons are real. They are absurdly powerful, and hoard treasure like gluttons. To this end, they insert themselves into the powerful megacorps, and begin pulling the strings of the world to funnel more wealth and power into their own personal treasure hoards. In the midst of this chaos, a virus wipes out a significant percentage of the world's population. Certain human beings begin manifesting magical abilities, often with disastrous consequences, while yet others begin birthing entirely new species of metahuman. This sees the likes of elves, dwarves, orcs, and trolls all existing where they were once thought the fantasies of overactive imaginations. And if you thought QAnon conspiracy theorists, white supremacists, anti-woke YouTube, and all the other disingenuous and toxic ideologies that exist today were a problem in our world, spreading misinformation and stirring up hate to increase their own base of power, well, how do you think those kinds of people reacted to suddenly living in a world where they were second in the dominance hierarchy to literal dragons, and sharing that number 2 spot with entirely new species? What about the followers of the Abrahamic religions? How did they react to no longer being the one and only special little race on the planet, while witchcraft, monsters, and even demons rose up all around them? If you think the scared and disenfranchised in our world are easily manipulated by people who claim to represent them while actually exploiting them for their own ends, what do you think they did when faced with these revelations? The Sixth World, to put it mildly, has seen some shit. Between wars, inquisitions, and witch hunts, and one dragon going nuclear on Germany, the world, now known as the Sixth World, has transformed into one infinitely more dangerous than the one we know. One where your end is just as likely to be met at the hands of corporate cyborgs and rogue AI as it is demons or a cult of blood mages, to say nothing of the regular lawless gun-toting gangs carving out their little empires, or junkies desperate for their next fix to escape the soul-crushing reality they now inhabit. So how do you survive this techno-magical nightmare? Well, if you want it safe, you sign your body and soul away to the corpos. They'll pay you, take care of you, shelter you in one of their enclaves where the streets are patrolled by their hired militia. Those same militia might break down the door to your house and make you disappear if one of their Matrix runners finds a suspicious email in your inbox, but that isn't something talked about in polite conversation. After all, you have a house and a safe place to raise your family. You can come home from a day of being worked long past your physical and psychological breaking point and enjoy some SimSense, drink soy caf in a preppy cafe, and pretend that the world isn't literally burning and the gates of hell aren't actually waiting to swallow it all up. Since you're here, why not get tested for magical aptitude? Maybe you're one of the gifted, the chosen. You can attend an arcane university and study the craft, become a researcher, and delve into the mysteries of the universe. Never mind that a dragon could vaporize your entire comfortable existence with a sneeze. What's important is that it all seems normal. It all feels safe. You can count on the militia, the walls of your house, the security of your job. You aren't an insignificant speck stuck on a ball of rock that's falling around a giant nuclear reaction that you can barely comprehend. You are part of something bigger. You matter. Inasmuch as you are useful to your owners anyway. It's an existence for sure. But is it life? So what's the alternative? Well, why not live beyond the pale, outside the safety of the corporate military compounds? You won't last long alone on the streets. Between the destitute and the desperate, you'll be robbed of everything you own, and your corpse will be sold to a chop shop to pay for some junkie's next hit. Maybe you could join a gang. Not much different from a corp in terms of how they control your life, but smaller, closer, more like a family. A big, scary, abusive family. Why not become a merc? You could join a freelance security contractor. They'll train you, equip you, give you a team, a purpose, a family, and hire you out to do the kind of work that corpo security considers itself too good to sully its hands with. Why stop there though? Maybe you aren't just some grunt for hire. Maybe you are one of the best, the most highly skilled, and most flexible when it comes to morality. Are you an ex-Spec Ops warrior looking for a high-paid contract? Maybe you're a powerful sorcerer looking to make it on their own, and fulfill your own vision rather than work as a peon chipping away at someone else's. Maybe you're a hotshot Matrix jockey. Maybe you're so good that the best ICE can't stop you, and the corpo hackers can't track you down and conscript you into their service. If that sounds like you, then maybe there's a crew and a job that's just waiting for you. Because deep in the darkest shadows of the Sixth World are the people who work the jobs so dangerous that they could change the world. From destabilizing companies or entire nations, to eradicating demonic cults and extraterrestrial invasions, the unsung legends of the Sixth World are the people who do the dirtiest and darkest work. While the dragons move their pawns across the chessboard, beneath the table, the rats gnaw at the legs, little by little, edging the game to an end where everything collapses. Those with the balls to stick it to the corpse, the gangs, and even the very dragons themselves, and the teeth to get the job done. You think that's you? Well, maybe. You could be a Shadowrunner. Video games and Shadowrun, as we've seen, have had a relatively limited history, especially compared to the likes of Dungeons and Dragons. While I can say that none of these games are bad, an online shooter with no story mode to speak of seems like a really odd way to use a license that's mainly about telling stories in a unique setting.
Even a first-person shooter for Xbox and PC. Sorry, alright?
While most Shadowruns do get down and dirty at some point, an interesting enough campaign can go weeks without players ever firing a shot. I've no doubt there's some crossover between the Shadowrun community and the online shooter market though. I spent quite a big chunk of my time playing PlanetSide with members of my D&D group back in the day, but I specifically remember asking one of them about the 360 game and just getting a "that's not Shadowrun" reply, and that was the end of the conversation. So I can't help but wonder if using the brand name for this kind of game actually worked against them. After all, if you aren't going to give people the thing they love the most about an IP, why even spend money on it? Why not just make your own original thing and sell that? Well, Netflix, why can't you do that? Or how about... Actually, I couldn't care less about Until Dawn, but the point stands. If you're spending money on an existing brand, surely the expectation is you're going to leverage a large chunk of their fanbase in with the deal. So then why would you put out something that has absolutely nothing to do with what those fans want? So the early steps in our development story actually take place in 2007, when Jordan Weissman reacquired the video game rights for Shadowrun from Microsoft with a view to create a game that felt more authentic to Shadowrun than an online PvP shooter. However, our story doesn't really begin until 2012, when Double Fine Games, the studio run by gaming legend Tim Schafer, successfully crowdfunded Broken Age through Kickstarter.
And that's the point. If you back this Kickstarter project, you will be cool and everybody will like you.
This single moment in time would ripple out through the world of independent gaming in monumental ways, and is basically the reason we got Baldur's Gate 3 from Larian in 2023. No, seriously. You see, there was a big clause in with the deal that Weissman had signed with Microsoft that stipulated he couldn't approach another publisher for financial backing. And while Microsoft did have the Xbox Live Marketplace providing all sorts of quirky small experiences to players, They'd made it very clear what the value they saw in Shadowrun was already, and that wasn't the direction Weissman wanted to go. Prior to Broken Age getting backed on Kickstarter, crowdfunding games was something with very limited potential. The original Mount & Blade is one of the standouts here, but Kickstarter and Double Fine Games proved that you could get your fans to finance your wild passion projects and get them shipped. So Weissman and his team
Hi, Kickstarter!
got their heads together, and in April 2012, a matter of months after the sightings of the first dragons within the Shadowrun setting, they launched their Kickstarter campaign. They explained their vision for Shadowrun Returns and asked the community for $400,000, an incredibly small sum by game design standards even back then, to bring their dream to life. The response from the fandom was immense, and they hit their target in 28 hours. Not long after surpassing their goals, Weissman was interviewed by gaming website Mojo regarding the Kickstarter and its success. In the interview, he said, "It does make an old man feel good to see the game setting we created 23 years ago still has resonance for people, and that they responded so strongly to bringing that world back to life on modern platforms." A couple of interesting points were that the game was planned for release on tablets as well as Windows and Mac. This was partly due to the game using 2D graphics that would be far less demanding and require much less processing power overall. At that time, and probably even more so at the time of writing this script, tablets weren't looked upon as serious gaming platforms. There are various reasons for this, no doubt, but one thing Weissman said was, "There is just something right about playing Shadowrun on a device that was science fiction when I wrote the game." I can definitely vibe with that. I probably wouldn't play a big RPG on a tablet simply because it's not something well suited to playing on the go when I don't know when I'll have to put down the system, and if I were at home, I'd prefer to game on my PC. But I can see how these markets have some potential. It was also critically important that the game have an editor too. While simply telling great stories within the Shadowrun universe is a great way to make a game, as a tabletop RPG, Shadowrun has always been about the stories groups create. Not just the GMs who write the stories, but also the players and the way their characters interact with each other, and how they develop as individuals and as a team. Many of the earliest text-based RPGs were just D&D groups sharing their own adventures, by coding them into games and distributing them via bulletin boards and magazines. And lest we forget that FASA Publishing started as a way to distribute Weissman's own Traveller Adventures. So it made a lot of sense to give players a chance to tell their own stories. Also, active mod scenes are what have kept games like Doom and Skyrim relevant even today. By the end of the Kickstarter campaign, they had surpassed $1.5 million. Due to the incredible response, numerous stretch goals were implemented, including a special mission that would connect the events of the Super Nintendo game with this one, and an entire Second City campaign that would eventually become Shadowrun Dragonfall. Regardless, the coffers were full, and it was time to get to work. Finally, in June of 2013, about 4 months later than their initial deadline of January, Harebrained Schemes released Shadowrun Returns. Judged as a product of its time, especially as a crowdfunded passion project that took about a year to develop, Shadowrun Returns is an absolute triumph. It was designed around a clear vision, but was also very aware of the limitations of its own development. The team at Harebrained Schemes didn't get more than 3 times the funding they had asked for, and suddenly decided to bloat the development time to create a massive 3D open world with a million half-baked systems. They stuck to their guns, they finished the game they set out to make, and they made the best damn version of that game they could with the time and resources made available to them. A lot of us aspiring indie devs could take a leaf out of this book, you know. The story is great, the combat is fun. Within this tiny little world of sprites and text-based dialogue, we get a real glimpse of what it's actually like to be a Shadowrunner in the 6th world, and deal with the dangers of technology gone wild, magic, and even dragons. In the larger context of the world of games today though, Shadowrun Returns is a good proof of concept. It's a solid first draft. The systems are there and basically fine, and the story is good enough for a lower budget indie game. The full potential of the game engine wouldn't be reached until much later, but there is still plenty to love here, so let's talk about that. Character creation is something that's pretty universal across all 3 games. There are only mild differences in each entry, so we may as well address it here, as, after clicking that new game button, it's the first thing you're going to be hit with. Making a character in an RPG always presents certain problems for me. The main one is that it's just too early for me to have any reasonable idea of what certain skills do and how useful certain traits will be in the game as a whole. You have to have a little faith that the game is good and balanced and doesn't massively favour one build over another. In the case of games like The Elder Scrolls, a pre-game tutorial mission tries to give you an overview of the basic playstyles you'll be met with before letting you pick your major and minor skills, and in games like this, you should be focused less on how best to beat the game and more on who you want to be in this world. In a game like Shadowrun or Baldur's Gate as another example, you have to understand that you're going to be part of a team, so you're better just picking a lane and leaning as hard as you can into that, and trusting that your squad will have your back, rather than trying to be a paladin technomancer who can dual wield a katana and an automatic weapon while being jacked into the Matrix and breathing fire. In Shadowrun Returns, I decided to keep things as simple as I could think of. Firstly, I went with being a human. There are several races to choose from, including the classic elf and dwarf, but also orc and troll. The metahuman races have some minor racial affinities that can boost or restrict the upper limits of what's possible for them. A human in peak physical shape may be stronger than your average troll, but put an orc or troll through the same training and nutrition regime, and their superior genetics will give them an edge. Elves likewise just have stronger affinity towards magic, and an ethereal beauty that can capture the attention of any race. My guy was going to be a street samurai. All brawn, not much in the brains or charisma department, a shotgun and a katana, and some heavy duty cyberware later. I could get other people to handle the spellcasting mumbo jumbo, and ride the waves of cyberspace for me later. This method isn't the most interesting class to play, as we'll talk about later, but it has very high survivability and keeps things simple for the player. Shadowrun is a skill-based system rather than class-based. It's a lot closer to Divinity Original Sin than Baldur's Gate. In class-based systems you have a job, such as Bard or Monk, and you level up that job in a linear way, gaining various powers and abilities in the process. In a skill-based system, you basically pick a collection of skills that you're interested in using, or fit the idea for the character you have in mind, and mash them together into your own creation. An archetype like Street Samurai or Physical Adept simply refers to people with certain specializations, rather than a hard class that develops the same for everyone. Common Shadowrun archetypes are Street Samurai, which I think speaks for itself, Physical Adept, a person who uses ki to enhance their physical attacks, Decker, a cyberspace hacker, mages who use magic for big explosive reasons, shamans who can channel power from sacred totems to summon monsters and use buff and debuff magic, and riggers who bring combat drones into battle. In the tabletop game, there's a lot more depth to these. A rigger in Shadowrun Pen and Paper could have a battle van or tank if they have enough money, but in this game it's drone control. There are some more potent classes that we find among certain hirelings, but they are basically just variations of what we have here. So from there it's up to you if you stick to a lane and go hard into it, or try to branch out and just be okay with a wider variety of skills. Picking a class will automatically spend a bunch of experience points for you. Experience in this game is called karma. In the tabletop game, karma is usually spent between runs, and is symbolic of time spent reflecting on your past experiences and engaging in training and study to prepare yourself for your next run. This wouldn't be so practical in a video game like this though, so karma is just spent freely by the player anytime they want. If you look at your character sheet, you'll see you've got a list of stats, skills, and specialities. Each of these has a numerical value, and purchasing a level in one of these costs the same amount of karma as its actual numeric value. So if I want to buy level 5 in quickness, I'm going to be spending 5 karma. Likewise, these sets of abilities, skills, and specialities act as a limiter to each other too. If I want to purchase level 5 in shotguns, I need level 5 in ranged combat, which in turn means I need level 5 in quickness. So that's a total of 15 karma I need to spend to get the speciality up. With the first game being quite a bit shorter than the others, it's very generous with its karma overall, but I'd still say it's best to just pick a lane and go with it. One thing to note is that this game doesn't have any stealth system. There are no skills for pickpocketing, and since most locks are electronic, they're usually handled by deckers. What this means is that the majority of your skills and abilities are only related to combat. They affect your role in a battle, and the overall amount of damage you can do. Charisma does offer some benefits to speech. There's a lot of dialogue trees in this game, and having high charisma will unlock certain extra speech options there. But it's not like Mass Effect, where you can convince the main enemy he's actually been wrong all along and have him blow his own brains out. You'll also gain certain conversation specializations when you're leveling this too. This is probably one area that I felt was kinda pointless. It's impossible to know how often any of these will come up versus any of the others, and just how much benefit you'll gain from that option. Having played the game, I'd say don't sweat it too much. Just imagine your character's background and pick something from there. Another skill issue in the first game concerns hacking. Throughout the game there are numerous computers that can be hacked to gain information and tactical advantages. In Shadowrun Returns, however, only the main character's decking skill counts towards this in any way. If there's an actual matrix jack point in an area, then your teammate decker can jack in and use that, but the ability to let deckers hack other computers wasn't added until Dragonfall. This is probably one of those time and budget limitation issues, but it is a little odd that a team leader just looks at a locked PC and shrugs, while his high-level decker is just hanging out outside the office waiting for a chance to be useful. Obviously this was pointed out after the launch, and with the added development time and money for the next 2 games, it was all smoothed out. So with all that out of the way, we just need to cycle through one of these many beautiful character portraits, or just go with this samurai looking dude here. It's time to see what the glamorous life of a Shadowrunner is really like. There's something depressingly real about the opening to Shadowrun Returns. They say war is months of endless waiting followed by a few intense minutes of fearing for your life. We don't open on our hero about to do the run of a lifetime, or living their best life in a nightclub surrounded by vice. We find them trapped in their apartment, a dingy, filthy place that they are very soon going to be thrown out of if they can't come up with the rent. The problem with working contract to contract is you can't know when the next one is going to show up, and our hero has been in a dry spell for a long time. The work has dried up, the money has dried up, his contacts have moved on, died, or are just leaving him on red. We're actually given a little time to just move around the space and get a brief idea of how things work. Shadowrun is a point-and-click game, and this particular entry was designed with tablets in mind. Left-clicking anywhere will move you around the map, with a double-click setting you to brisk jog to get there. Holding the right mouse button and dragging your mouse will move the camera around too. You can scroll in and out to zoom, but you won't be doing any rotating as these are sprite-based backgrounds. There's a few icons to click on too. Looking glasses will give you a little flavor text, while clicking on the hand icon on your computer will open up the dialog window and let you cycle through a few options to discover that absolutely no one wants to talk to you. Hello, dating in your 40s. This is a pretty bleak start, guys. It might be time for our boy here to clean up and go corpo. Or it would be, right up until a special message drops into their inbox.
Hey buddy, hope I didn't catch you at a bad time. Don't bother with your side of the conversation, I'm not really here. Just one reason for this vid, someone finally kicked me, I'm dead. Probably had it coming.
Meet Sam Watts, one of our hero's old acquaintances. The depth of this connection is actually something we can make decisions about later. These choices don't really have any in-game effect. Whether or not you thought of Sam as a close friend, a co-worker you went on a rough run with, or a disposable asset, doesn't do anything game-changing. It just says something about your character and maybe helps you build a clearer picture of who they are in your mind. The important thing here is that Sam is dead. He's contacting you via a dead man's switch. Basically, he took out a life insurance policy which pays out when certain conditions are met. So when he flatlines or is listed as legally dead, the insurance company ping the next of kin with the last message, and once the conditions are met, the policy pays out. You might be asking yourself, what the hell kind of twisted system is that? But in a world of ultra-capitalism and laws that only apply if you're found out or too poor to pay the right people, and it's all too easy to make very powerful and dangerous enemies, I can see the potential opportunity here. Whatever you think of Sam, he clearly thinks something of you, as, based on the outcome of your last run together, he seems to think you're the best person to handle investigating his death and getting back at whoever it was who ended him. It doesn't sound all that safe, but our hero is hurting for a payday, and since nothing else is miraculously falling into his lap, he packs up his things and heads for Seattle. If they'd had even a hint of what they were about to get themselves into, they'd probably have stayed at home and waited to get evicted. A lot happens in our opening scene in Seattle, and we meet a few interesting characters very quickly, as well as get some ideas of the politics in the area. Our first scene is at Redmond Organ Grinders, a franchise that serves as both morgue and organ transplant service. Cadavers come in, fresh organs and healthy patients come out.
It's a fucking meat grinder. People go in one end. meat comes out the other.
This is the place that Sam's body is being kept. Our hero arrives to speak to Dresden, a dwarf who seems to take far too much enjoyment in his job judging by his character portrait, but we can't hold a guy having a little pride in his work against him. Things take a nosedive off a cliff though when we discover that Sam wasn't simply blown away by gangers or thugs looking to collect a debt on him. He was in fact the most recent victim of the now infamous Emerald City Ripper. That's right, Seattle is in the grip of terror from a lone monster that is surgically removing organs from its victims, and poor old Sam is the most recent casualty of this spree, having had his liver removed by this creep. Not only are we introduced to Dresden, but we have our first run-in with Officer McClunsky, a Lone Star detective who thinks he's a hard-ass like Max Payne without understanding what Max stood for in any way, shape or form. This guy has a big attitude and a real short temper, and since the Emerald City Ripper is his ticket to a lieutenant's badge and a big fat raise, he's not at all happy to find a freelancer looking over the Ripper's most recent victim and probably contaminating any evidence found therein. So we not only have a much bigger problem to deal with than we originally thought, but we now have this disgruntled troll looking out for us too. Dresden, however, offers a ray of hope by mentioning that Sam often drank at the Seamstress Union, a popular watering hole for all kinds of clientele. Still, Dresden doesn't know much about that, as in his own words, "I'm not really the outgoing type. Always too much to be done around here. Plus, the dead are just easier to get along with." You got that right, bro. He then suggests we check out one of the body lockers in his place. Not sure how examining another cadaver will help us, we go along with it and get an even bigger shock when this one gets up and starts talking to us. And it's here we meet Jake Armitage for the first time. As mentioned, a special mission to connect the events of the SNES Shadowrun game with Shadowrun Returns was a stretch goal that was smashed by the community. Originally a backer-only exclusive, the community actually voted to make this tie-in available to all players, which is an awesome by gamers for gamers move. So it would seem that after his resurrection at the start of the SNES game, Jay got the idea that a morgue might actually be a good place to hide out now and then when things got a little too hot for him in the Sixth World, and he's been a semi-regular patron of this unofficial hostel for a while, much to Dresden's distress. Don't tell me you haven't considered it. Cheaper than a coffin hotel and the service is just as good. If you're thinking the name Armitage sounds familiar, well, you may have read Neuromancer at some point. There's a ton of references and homages to that book throughout all three of these games. While it's never been officially confirmed, the name seems like it was taken from the name of the man who employs Case and sets up the data heist in the book. So not only is Jake a regular at the Seamstress Union himself, and the last person to see Sam alive, he also knows exactly where they found his body, and he's very willing to show us where it is. He just has a teeny tiny problem with a local gang trying to collect a bounty on his head to deal with first. Welcome to the Sixth World. Nothing is free, and the price is usually blood. Yours, or someone else's. Since our party isn't at full capacity yet, I won't unravel the combat. We're still just getting set up, but suffice to say we smash some heads, and the Halloweeners get the idea that trying to collect on Jake's bounty is a poor investment. The next section is a little lesson in exploring your options. Jake leads you to the crime scene before heading off on his way. The problem now is that we've got a Lone Star cop blocking the entrance. You'll notice that grayed out text box. That option would have been available to me if I'd taken that charisma speciality at character generation, and I might have got through this in a few less steps. Likewise, there is an option to just straight up bribe him and get him out of the way. But there's a simpler option. Why not walk around? Talk to a few more people, and maybe buy a coffee as a peace offering to our guy who's being made to work so late to guard some bloodstains in a chalk outline, so a jerk like McClunsky can weasel his way to a lieutenant's badge. While none of the Shadowrun games have immersive sim levels of agency, these are after all low-budget RPGs, there is usually more than one way around a lot of problems. Our investigation here ends with us finally needing to head to the Seamstress Union to speak to someone named Coyote. This is more or less where the tutorial part of the game ends though. We've had a taste of what we're getting ourselves into, we've been hooked into our mystery, and while we've got a few hoops to jump through before we can really start shadowrunning, let's take a look at a few cool features and meet a few interesting characters. We'll get deeper into the story later, as even as the smallest of these three games, it does have a few twists and turns, and does a good job showing you what it's like to live in the Sixth World. Within the cities of the worlds of Shadowrun, you will often find barons. Barons are places that are beyond the law. Between wars, dragons, and the rise of magic, there have been all kinds of disasters in the Sixth World. This has created areas that are so corrupt they are simply beyond saving. Our heroes in Shadowrun Hong Kong grew up in the Seattle Barrens, and have more than a few terrible stories to tell, and Kowloon's walled city, as we'll talk about later, is a truly cursed part of the world in and of itself. The Seattle Barrens is carved up among flesh-eating ghouls, gangs and cults, and all of the worst kinds of criminals. It's also the place you're likely to find a Shadowrunner or two. No private law enforcement contractor will go in there unless they're in force, and even then they can expect one hell of a fight. Violent death is just another fact of life here, and only the strongest and most ruthless have even a chance. Still, there are some havens. On the fringes of this dark world we find the Seamstress Union, a bar that has one foot in both worlds. Suits and ties can drink with the dirty and the dangerous, and within these walls at least, a sense of order exists. The Union is the first haven or hub we operate out of in these games. Dragonfall and Hong Kong both have bigger and better versions of this place, but there's something cozy about the Union. I'll try not to keep repeating myself about the budget, but this was again a smart move. While this area is small, it's very dense. There's a lot of personality here, from the front end bar with its pool tables and big skull hanging over it, to the music stage and the VIP booths at the back. There's just something very real about it all. Even in our first of many trips there, we get a very family vibe about the place. This is a community that looks out for each other, and even a rowdy drunk like Sam Watts can find some degree of acceptance here. Between the gangs, ghouls, and all other kinds of dangers here, and corporate law enforcement being just as likely to stomp on your face as help you, all the people here can do is look out for each other. The Seamstress Union is run by its queen, Mrs. Kubota, a half-African Japanese woman who shields her caring nature behind a hard professional wall. The first person we meet in the Union is Cherry Bomb. She's an elf student looking to work her way through university, and the moment she lays eyes on you, she knows exactly what you're about. Neither Cherry Bomb nor Kubota have particularly nice things to say about Sam, but that doesn't mean he wasn't one of them, or that his death doesn't weigh on them. While Kubota can be all business, and we soon realize that her business is our business, so bad business, that doesn't mean she's a heartless crime lord. In a later scene, after we've liberated Coyote, we'll get to her, from danger, she scolds the kid for missing work shifts and bleeding all over her floor, and also threatens her with nothing less than indentured servitude to pay off her cybernetic replacements for her mangled arm. No sooner is Coyote out of sight, and Kubota breaks down in tears of relief for having what she sees as a surrogate daughter returned to her. Mr. Clue, the troll bouncer, while extremely intimidating, is incredibly polite and respectful, and routinely refers to the patrons of this place as family. If McClunkey is the stereotype for a troll, Mr. Clue is living proof that stereotypes are not a good way to judge people. When asked about Sam, he says that it wasn't uncommon for him to have to remove Sam from the bar, but he was always gentle about it. Sam may have been troubled, but he was clearly hurting inside, and his desire to obliterate himself was a way of escaping that pain. Beneath the base layer of the Seamstress Union, hidden by a secret door that is unlocked by pressing specific piano keys, is the place where the real money is made. The Union is a runner safe house and a staging ground for all kinds of operations. There are Mr. Johnsons and fixers in the bar looking for people in the biz, and dealers, hackers and surgeons to prep you for your run, as well as a bunk to sleep in and a place to stash your stuff. Keep an eye on Algernon the magic merchant. He'll be popping up again later. And Mr. Johnson is just a name used by any corporate agents looking to recruit runners. This keeps things relatively anonymous between the parties with the money and the parties with the weapons. Runners are deniable disposable assets to the corps, but even the wealthy and the powerful cross them at their peril. A good decker or fixer will vet a client and get more information on them. We won't deal with too many Mr. Johnsons in this game, as we only have a couple of side missions, but it's still pretty cool that they're there. Venturing out from the Seamstress Union, we're going to find ourselves embroiled in a lot of sixth world problems. We've already encountered one gang, the Halloweeners, in the prologue, but down by the famous Seattle fish market there are the Cutters, who shake down merchants for protection money, and we soon find ourselves in a BTL den taking on dangerous snuff makers. For those who've played Cyberpunk, BTLs are similar to brain dances. They're an illegal type of SimStim. Regular SimStims let you live out the fantasies of being rich and famous and all the things you'll never experience unless you're born into generational wealth and power. BTLs, or Better Than Lifes, are those with the safeties turned off, and they offer any experience, be it dream or nightmare. Snuff is a big part of this, which means some poor sucker is going to die in agony so that others can get high off shooting those sensations into their brains. Coyote grew up in one of these dens and lost a family member to them. To put it simply, junkies who can't pay wind up on the cast list. Coyote's vendetta against BTL rings is our only really major side quest in the game. As mentioned, we have a couple of simple work for pay jobs available, but we are for the most part exclusively taking care of Sam Watts' murder case. Going along with this does make her and her boyfriend Paco available to hire for runs at zero cost. The only downside to this is they're both street samurai with ranged specialities, and that's exactly what my guy was too. There's nothing wrong with sending a bunch of killers into a kill zone. You can make any setup work in this game, but having a diverse team opens up a lot of options and tactics for runs than the simple brute force method. Wow, who'd have thought there were actual logical reasons for diversity hiring in a business? Hiring on a team of runners to help you take on missions was marketed as a feature of the game, but was a little disappointing for me. Again, yada yada time, yada yada budget, yada yada it does get better later. I like to work with well-rounded characters with a stake in the story rather than just hirelings who are coming along for a payday. You are only choosing runners based off their effectiveness in combat this way. You'll occasionally have to bring a decker to get into the Matrix, but it's not like you can get a high charisma face to help sweet talk your way past security guards. So we've got our safe haven, we can hire a team, and we're starting to scratch the surface of how messed up the world is now. Maybe we should talk about how to fight back. While combat is pretty consistent throughout all three entries, there are a few changes to the system, and more importantly, I experienced a variety of character builds while playing across all the games. So while I'll do my best not to repeat myself, we will be touching on this a little as we explore both Dragonfall and Hong Kong as well. Shadowrun is a tactical turn-based RPG. It's not on a level with something like Divinity or Baldur's Gate 3, where scenery interactions and good planning can break basically any encounter. And it's not like a tactics game where you can place a character on some random, seemingly innocuous square and confidently declare victory in the next 7 turns. Still, it's a game that requires a little thinking and strategy if you want to get your whole team out alive. Being small teams of specialists, Shadowrunners are routinely outnumbered and the enemy often has the home turf advantage, so they are going to have plenty of nasty surprises hidden up their sleeves. This makes the life expectancy of the average runner very low, and a leader who can routinely get their crew home safely a valued commodity indeed. With the right leadership and planning, a small, well-armed and coordinated team can bring down a more powerful enemy, even on their home turf. Combat takes us into turn-based mode. One major difference in Returns and the other two games is you cannot choose to enter combat mode. It happens automatically when an enemy is in range. Likewise, in Returns, you cannot exit combat mode once it's started until an entire area is cleared of enemies. This means even using a load screen door might not put you back into regular movement, and you'll be moving your characters one round at a time even through large empty areas. This was a big point of frustration in the first game for me, and it may be why quite a few people I knew described this game as something they enjoyed and never finished. So in the top right of the screen you can see your character portraits. The game doesn't have a mixed initiative, either your whole team will go first or the enemy will go first, and it's usually you. There is a default order to use your characters, but you're welcome to just click a character portrait and issue commands to that character regardless. So if you want your mage to buff your samurai's accuracy and damage the armor of your enemy prior to engaging them, it's not a problem at all. You'll notice this number in the lower right of the character's portrait. These are your action points. Everyone starts with just 2, but you can use stimulants and spells to boost this number for several rounds. Later in the game it actually boosts up to 3, and this opens up a lot more options, as you'll be more inclined to fire off big showy abilities that, until that time, used all your action points in a single move. This means a wider array of tactics and more fun. Everything you do in combat costs action points. You can move up to a certain distance, attack, reload, use an active ability or cast a spell, stand overwatch and attack anyone who enters your threat range, use an item such as a health kit or stimulant, and even enter the Matrix and attempt a cyberspace hack. Actions will cost 1 or 2 action points depending on what you want to do, but the most common use of your points is spending 1 point to move into cover and another to attack or use some kind of offensive power. There are variations of this, of course. If you're already in cover, you could just stand your ground and attack twice, or you could spend 2 action points to throw a grenade that could damage multiple targets depending on how enemies are grouped. Cover is a critical component to surviving a combat encounter. It might be pretty obvious that in a world of unrestricted access to military weapons, that standing out in the open with a sword is going to land you in the chop shop very quickly. So moving through cover and carefully approaching your target is going to work to your advantage. When making an attack or using any kind of targeted power, you'll be given a percentile chance of the attack's success. This chance can be augmented by either buffing the attacker with stimulants or magic, or debuffing the target in a similar way. But in either case, getting closer to your target will almost always make them easier to hit. This can also augment damage with spread-based weapons like shotguns, or even be a detriment to your attack with grenade launchers that can damage you, or sniper rifles that gain their accuracy bonuses by being further away. Grenades and certain spells have an area of effect for their damage. This means that while they can miss, they are still going to explode somewhere, meaning your target or another target could still be caught in the blast, and in a worst case scenario, so could one of your allies. Grenades come in frag and flash variety. There are others, but they are basically variations of this basic type. Frags damage health, while flash damage action points, rendering characters unable to move or attack for the next turn. If action points are reduced to 0, the character goes into a kind of stunned state that makes them even easier to hit. What this means is while you can almost never kill multiple enemies in a single round of combat, you can severely reduce a team's threat level and remove members from the next round, or at the very least restrict which of their powers and abilities they can use. I don't know exactly how it works under the hood, but it seems like most human enemies obey the same rules as the player characters. This sort of swings both ways though, as enemies can be pretty smart. Grouping your team together behind what you think is good cover will lead to them hurling grenades your way to first damage all your team members and then reduce their action points, meaning they're unable to heal or escape from the situation they've created for themselves. So be sure to spread your team out and return the favour if any enemy units decide to get too close together. As with most RPGs, you want your tankier, more heavily armoured units in the thick of it, where they can hog all the attention, while your spellcasters and tech guys hang back and cause damage from afar, and drop the occasional heal. One interesting point here is that the heal spell can only recover the damage received from the last attack, so it's actually quite limited, and you'll be relying mostly on medkits and trauma kits to get your runners through their job. Mages of course have plenty of big flashy high damage spells, but I found their best use is in a more supportive role by buffing players with haste and accuracy, and debuffing enemies and limiting their movement options. Shamans are also good in this role, but their unique powers are all based around summoning. There are actually places in various battlefields where spirits await to be summoned, but Shaman can carry charms and fetishes to bring in spirits at any time. They have to sacrifice one of their action points to command a spirit, and each round there is a chance that the spirit will break free and simply wreak havoc on everyone, especially the Shaman. Again, this can happen to an enemy Shaman too, and it never stopped being funny and helpful when it did. The Shaman gets to choose how many action points it will power up the summon with. More action points make it more likely the creature will escape, but it's a gamble worth taking to have these truly devastating creatures backing you up. If you don't like the idea of the gamble though, then maybe you prefer the aid of a rigger to a shaman. Similar to shaman, riggers bring extra help to battle in the form of their drones. Activating a drone will also reduce a rigger's own action pool, and late game they can have 2 drones to fight with. Drones can also access small vents, meaning they can get the drop on enemies and even escape into them when things are going bad. While drones are equipped with various modern weapons such as grenade launchers and machine guns, their accuracy is significantly lower than that of characters, and while a drone can be repaired, should it be destroyed, your rigger is just a guy with a gun he's only half decent with at this point. So with all these options, we spread out into the various cover as the battle starts, throw down buffs on our frontline guys and get them into the thick of it, try to stun and slow our enemies before they can retaliate, and whittle their numbers down through tactics, magic and good old fashioned blunt force trauma. There are these occasional battles where it feels like you're just being dogpiled, and you'll be wondering how the hell you're supposed to manage all of this. But you can always make it work somehow. And that moment of desperation followed by a very quick change of plans is a huge part of what it is to be a Shadowrunner in the first place. So while this is a slow and steady combat system, it does create the vibe of specialist operatives scraping through life or death situations against greater numbers, and only surviving by the skin of their teeth, luck, and whatever gods happened to be watching at the time. Many was the mission where when the final bullet was spent or the last runner charged through the exit, I let out an audible sigh and fell back into my chair with no idea how the hell I just pulled that win out of my ass. One of my favourite things about this game is it weaves the supernatural and science fiction elements together through most of its narrative. From a character point of view, most of it only matters in combat, but as we investigate this murder we employ the aid of summoned spirits from a recent airline crash to gain information about the scene of a crime, as well as run the Matrix to hack a database and get a match on DNA evidence from the same crime scene. The plot is multi-layered though, While the original theory is that the victims are chosen at random and the stolen organ is something of a trophy for the Ripper, it becomes clear that there's more to it when we realise the removed organs were transplanted into the victims sometime before their murders. Then there's Sam's relationship with his sister. Where Sam was a runner of the shadows and a social dropout, seemingly hell-bent on destroying himself, one way or the other, Jessica is a prim corporate woman whose world couldn't be further from Sam's. She tries to dissuade you from completing your mission and fills you in on some details of their youth together. It seems Sam tried to be the man of the house after their father passed away and failed in spectacular fashion. This led to their mother working 3 jobs to try and keep the house afloat, and Sam ultimately running out on them both. Jessica eventually moved to California to escape Sam completely, and their mother's life ended only a year prior. Our Ripper turns out to be a mentally unstable elf, masquerading as their own psychiatrist, having murdered them, mutilated the face and used fake dentures to basically get himself declared dead and just keep on living as the psychiatrist. Once we get into the guts of their lab, we find all kinds of abominable Frankenstein-type works being done using a combination of science and possibly necromancy. Either way, we get one hell of a fight to bring this sicko down. His last words, though, are these.
This is a place of broken things. I remake them. She asked me to remake her. She was playing both of us.
And searching through his computer, we start to get a clear picture of what's going on. In accordance with organ grinder policy, Sam and Jessica's mother had numerous organs removed and donated to various people after her death. This included a liver, which went to Sam. Jessica, feeling this was a violation of her mother, employed our good doctor to collect these body parts so she could be reinterred with them intact. Pretty gruesome, all told. We confront her about this at Sam's funeral, where we are joined by an unknown elf woman. An attack by a hit squad and a pack of ravenous ghouls later, and we realize the woman was Lynn Telestrian. Aside from being a member of the super rich Telestrian family, she's also the spokeswoman for the Universal Brotherhood. Now, I don't need to cover every detail here, but this is where the story kicks up from a simple murder investigation into a world-ending scenario dealing with interdimensional bugs that need to be defeated in both the physical and astral planes before they'll actually die. The Universal Brotherhood is a cult, operating like most cults do, by pulling in the disenfranchised and the downtrodden, a class of people there will never be a shortage of in the 6th world, to work towards manifesting one of these things' queens and bringing about an interdimensional bug apocalypse. We eventually find ourselves in a room with some of the 6th world's most powerful inhabitants, or at the very least, representatives of such godly creatures who consider this a threat worthy of at least a portion of their personal attention. Oh hey, there's Algernon again. Fancy meeting you here. In a moment of Deus Ex Machina, Telestrian Industries has been working on the perfect weapons to gun these things down, and we are sent on one final big run to stop this invasion before it starts. And for Seattle at least, we are successful. Unfortunately, the Universal Brotherhood has chapter houses all over the world. And while we can thwart them here, they do later manage to manifest one of their queens in Chicago, which is eventually walled up and turned into an exclusion zone. And yeah, that's our game. In the aftermath, we get to make a few decisions about the fates of certain characters, including our protagonist. I personally used my newfound clout to get Officer McClunsky fired, but I turned down a sweet corporate position as the head of security for Telestrian Industries. Still, it seems Sam wasn't being entirely honest about the big payout on his dead man switch.
If you're calling this number, that means the job's done right. Congratulations, amigo. I knew you'd do it. You are always a dependable one. More than me, anyway. I just want to say thank you for whatever you did. It means a lot. Not even knowing what you did, it still means a lot, because I know you did something. You know what I mean? I know you made it right, somehow. You're the only one who ever tried to help me, ever. Except my sister. She tried more than once. She tried. I never let her, though. Never let her in. I regret that a lot. Did I ever tell you about her, buddy? We're twins, I guess. You're still a twin after one of you dies. I don't know. Doesn't matter, I guess. God, listen to me. God, listen. Do me a favor, will you? If you talk to her, her name's Jessica. Tell her I'm sorry, okay, for everything. She'll know what for. She's Catholic, so she'll forgive me. Oh, I need her to forgive me. Just tell her I love her. Anyway, you need to get paid, which would be great, except for one thing. I got nothing. Never did. Know how it is, right? Sorry, but hey, thanks again for giving a crap. Seriously, I appreciate it. Tell you what, if you feel sorry about it, look into my family background a bit. There's gotta be money in there somewhere. Maybe one of them can throw you a few bucks. Take care, amigo. See you in hell.
So maybe I should have taken that gig. Same old Sam. Ah well, when you've got the kind of skill to run the shadows, there's plenty of secure jobs you could land, but being a runner is the closest thing you'll ever get to freedom in the 6th world. All told, my playthrough of Shadowrun Returns clocked in around 12 hours, give or take, and a lot of that time comes from just how long it takes to work through each of the battles. It's a slow and steady system of moving, shooting and healing. By the end of the game I'd basically given up on my katana. Switching weapons doesn't cost any action points in combat while reloading does. This means there were a few moments here and there where I'd busted out and gamble on getting the killing blow on an enemy rather than reloading my shotgun. I say gamble because the accuracy of my katana was always significantly lower than that of my shotgun, and its damage output was just so much higher that it seemed pointless trying to use my katana just for style points. So you may have noticed what sounds like some political commentary going on in this script. Well, that's the heart and soul of Cyberpunk in general. Good sci-fi is looking at the world how it is now, exploring certain tangents and elements, and seeing the extreme places those can lead to. Cyberpunk explores the worst excesses of capitalism. What happens to a world where government checks and balances are removed, or where corporations are so powerful that those checks and balances can safely be ignored. There's all kinds of commentary on classism, and in Shadowrun especially racism and fanaticism. We are going to be bringing this up again very soon actually. If you think Deus Ex predicted the 21st century, that's because it's just a well thought out vision of the future, albeit one that's been dramatized and had a healthy dose of rule of cool injected into it. And this is awesome. Fiction is a great way to explore all kinds of political, social and philosophical ideas. The fact that it's a story happening to characters also means we can put our personal emotions and feelings about certain ideas on hold to talk about what is best for the characters in that situation. And because in games we are the characters, it's the perfect vessel for those alternative points of view to have a profound impact on us. As I said in my Snatcher video, politics belong in video games. If you don't think so, then you're implying that games are an inferior storytelling method to books, comics, movies, TV, etc. You may not like something, that may even be the desired reaction of the artist, but that doesn't mean it shouldn't be there. So overall, I'd say I had as good a time playing Returns this time as I had in my previous playthroughs. It holds up very well, and these beautiful stylized sprites make the game more or less timeless. Still, as someone who's played a lot of RPGs, this game felt almost restrictively small. The story itself is fine, and the way it flows from murder investigation to stopping an apocalyptic death cult worked really well. But this world is brimming with so much mystery and many weird and wonderful stories to tell, and I felt like I'd barely scratched the surface by the end. Fortunately though, we have a whole 2 more games that we can use to dive deeper into it all. If Shadowrun Returns feels like a good first draft, then Dragonfall is the final product. Released as DLC for Returns in 2014, and then later shipped as its own game, this was more or less the team getting their game coded and shipped, and then using the time and resources they had from sales to just make a huge story add-on. Only a few changes to gameplay were added, likely due to feedback and the easing up of time constraints. So this is more or less the same as the first game, but with a lot more story. This is actually how I came to the conclusion to do this as one super video rather than 3 standalone videos. There just aren't enough differences between the 3 games mechanically to warrant going over all the gameplay stuff 3 times over like there is in something like, say, Project Zero. So from here on, we'll be talking about the story and the world building mostly. While Returns clocks in around the 12-hour mark, my Dragonfall playthrough took about 25 hours. Still relatively timid by RPG standards, but a solid effort, and a game that is exactly as long as it needs to be, and doesn't overstay its welcome at all. Where Returns only had a couple of named NPCs with stories and a personal stake in the primary mission, Dragonfall gives you an entire team of runners who have a long history together, have their own personalities, likes and dislikes, and full stories of their own to uncover, complete with special mission attached to said stories. Yep, they went full Mass Effect 2 here. Instead of a cozy tavern on the fringes of Seattle's most dangerous areas, we have a full little community to interact with and take care of, and all of its inhabitants have their own backgrounds to uncover. This is a world full of mystery, and while Return's story is fine, a solid B- that achieved everything it set out to do within the limits of its time and budget, this is a full-on epic tale of cyberpunk, politics, magic, cults, demons, and a battle with dragons. This is everything you could possibly want from a video game carrying the title Shadowrun. That doesn't mean it's perfect. Well, not in my book exactly. There are some choices made here that aren't to my preference. That's fine, we all have our tastes, right? And I'll talk about them when I get to it. There is also one game-breaking bug that almost brought my playthrough, and indeed this entire video, to a crashing halt. This bug has never been officially addressed or patched, and it was only thanks to a Reddit post that I figured out a way around it. I will be screaming about this when I get to it. If you just want to know how to get past that bug, then the timestamp is here, and the link to the thread I followed is down below. So all that aside, let's see how this one starts. Shadowrun Returns opens in probably the most unglamorous way imaginable. It shows life in the shadows not as some dream of freedom or excitement, but one of rent, bills, and job insecurity. Dragonfall, on the other hand, goes hard. It grabs you by the balls, puts the squeeze on, and doesn't let go until the very end. After character creation, I created a physical adept this time, and this became my go-to class from this point on. Really fun to play. We open with the crew assembled outside Harfeld Manor. Our face on this one is Monica. She's the leader of the crew and the glue that holds this mismatched squad formed of a human cyborg, an elven mage, and a troll sniper together. Our created character isn't a regular member of the group. However, they and Monica have a past together, and she thought she'd bring them in to help with what is essentially a milk run. This is a simple snatch and grab. The mansion has plenty of valuables that can be fenced, but the real payload is held in the vault beneath it. Even from the start, our teammates are showing off their personalities. There's dialogue and banter, and maybe even a little flirting going on here and there. Once we get down beneath the manor to the vault door, our troll sniper Iga decides to step in. She's currently keeping the engine in the escape vehicle hot, but her military background makes her very rigid and hard to deal with. Monica needs to jack in to bypass the door locks, but while she's in there, someone needs to be in charge. It seems almost like defiance on Monica's part to choose our player as the de facto boss. To Monica, they're a trusted friend who's been down a few rabbit holes with her, but they're an unknown quantity to the group, and in Iga's eyes, just a rookie. She does not take this snub well, and seems to think that having a tantrum about it is what's best for the operation, when security could be alerted any second. Still, the matter is settled and Monica jacks in. Seconds later, she's dead. Whatever the hell happened, this wasn't just some black ice. This was too fast. The team had no chance to pull the plug. As Monica passes away, her final words are Feuerschwinger. She names the Firewing. With Monica down, we can venture into what we thought was a vault with data, and turns out to be a secure room that seems to be part of a larger underground complex. This is not what any of them signed up for. This is supposed to be a milk run, a light data snatch and grab, and now your Decker is dead, guards are pouring in from a subterranean death base, and you're being attacked by an aged orc, covered in skin grafts with armor so powerful, you'll need military-grade armor-piercing rounds to get through it. Oh, and he has a minigun. Fortunately, Iga comes through for us, and shows us a way out via a side entrance. You just need to punch through and get the hell out of there, and with one team member dead, that is exactly what you do. No data, no payday. But no life, no payday either. Though you will have considerably less bills to worry about that way. Our hero and the party bail and escape into the night with the alarms of the mansion fading into the distance behind them, and only one question on their lips. What the hell just happened in there? And Iga especially, despite not being in the room when things went bad, has some pointed opinions to share about you. After a very intense debriefing, the situation is diffused and the attention of the party refocused by the team's fixer, Paul Amsel. This guy is the real rock of the team. While Monica kept everyone together out in the field, Paul Paul was the guy who found them work, vetted the clients, made sure they had a high chance of survival, and kept the lights on for them when they got home. Despite being a man of small stature, he commands immense respect from all the team, and just his raised voice is enough to silence everyone else. He's the perfect example of someone who could tell you he's not mad, he's disappointed, and you would just wish he would be mad at you. Paul didn't set up this run though, Monica did. You see, Berlin at the moment is known as the Flux State. After an anarchist revolution, the city seceded from Germany and exists as a barely stable anarchist community of sorts. I think this is the kind of world Tracer Tong envisioned at the end of Deus Ex when he wants you to crash the global communications. He wanted a world where communities would be smaller and their governments would be something truly within everyone's grasp. Governments wouldn't be dealing with huge global problems that require expensive education and a wealthy network of contacts to navigate, but rather they'd be dealing with day-to-day problems that affected everyone in the community. The Anarchs in Vampire are another point of comparison. You know, what with them being anarchist vampires. They look out for each other and protect each other, but since even the strongest of them won't step up to be a real leader, they ultimately fall to more organized power structures like the Camarilla. Rather than having any one central point of power, Berlin is a lot of smaller communities all vying for their own little slice of life. Basically communities of people looking out for each other and etching out an existence all of their own. The flux part comes because things change a hell of a lot, as we'll come to see soon enough. But Monica was in love with the Flux State. For all its flaws, she saw it as one of the only true alternatives to everything else that was on offer. So she was seemingly lured into this run by her contact, a man called Green Winters, who claimed the data was concerning a threat to the Flux State. So we have a little work to do in our new hub location, the Kraus Bazaar, to locate our client. I'll get back to this place later, as it's one of the best things about the game, but let's keep going with the setup. Our motivations are quite simple here. We need to know our enemy. They are probably now searching for us, given that we stumbled into some kind of Dr. Doom secret lab, and we owe them some payback for Monica. This leads us to the Kesselhaus Hotel and Nightclub, where our next big operation begins. In returns, a lot of missions defaulted into combat far too early, and once it started, you weren't getting out until the end. I'm pleased to say we get a lot more chances to just talk to people and try to overcome problems with some lateral thinking here. As often happens in the Flux State, the management of the club has recently changed hands. While more stable communities like Kraus Bazaar exist, there are plenty of places run by gangs for the purposes of producing and selling vice. Now that the blood has been mopped up from the dance floor, it's more or less business as usual around here. We've got to charm or bully our way into the upper levels where the hotel is, if we want to find Green Winters though. And while there are plenty of interesting little twists and turns on this mission, the endgame is that he met exactly the same fate as Monica. So, Iga, got any strong opinions about my capacity as a runner now? Gonna quit with the ironic fearless leader lines? Want me to break that rifle of yours over your skull? Ah, who am I kidding? I can't stay mad at you. Looting the place, we stumble into a handful of DVDs. Yeah, remember those? And we get a call from this guy. Meet Blitz. He's about to become our team's new decker. He just needs help escaping the current management of this hotel. Again, we'll dive into his background story later because I love this guy. Actually, I love all these guys. And these guys. My precious little boys and girls. Anyway, once we're back in the base and we've managed to acquire an antique DVD player and a CRT TV, no, really, that's something we have to get, we can finally unlock the mystery of our employer and see just how deep the shit we fall into goes this time. It's bad guys. Like, real bad. I'm a fun-loving guy who's also a great listener. I love hiking, clubbing, and all kinds of pets. I'm looking for a cute, funny, adventurous girl who's down to party. I don't respond to profiles without pics. No walks, no trolls. Sorry, ladies.
I'm new to this game. You see, I've normally got loads of birds, but there was a coach crash last week and I lost 40 of them.
So, slight lore dump inbound here. The Awakening was not a pretty thing for the planet, or the various metahuman races that live there. In the snap of a finger, every little bit of occult mumbo-jumbo you can imagine suddenly became very real and very powerful magic. A virus wiped out around 50% of the planet, specifically those who thought the virus was some kind of deep state conspiracy, and that masks and vaccines were part of some satanic ritual, or whatever they uncovered by, air quotes, doing their own research. Then people started giving birth to elves, dwarves and orcs, and dragons began soaring across the skies. Amidst all this carnage, the hot topic of the news was changing every day. So while the world at large may have forgotten about the Firewing, the people of Germany have not. While most dragons are subtle creatures playing 5D chess over thousands of years, the Firewing spent 4 months just roasting Germany and everyone in it alive. She was eventually brought down by a scientist called Adrian Volclair, who created the first dragon-slaying weapon. Since she was shot down and fell into an irradiated zone known as the Socks, she has never been seen again. Adrian Volclair also vanished not long after that. The DVDs reveal that our client, Mr. Greenwinters, was actually Herman Volclair, Adrian's brother. Adrian believed that the Firewing was still alive and took a team into the Socks to get her out. Herman never saw his brother after that, and began a campaign trying to find out what happened to him. When he couldn't turn up anything on Adrian, he tried tracking down data on the Firewing herself, and that's when things started to go bad for him. Herman concluded that the Firewing was alive and on his trail. Operating similar to other dragons, she now has her own security force, headed by an armored orc with a lot of skin grafts. Just about everyone he's brought into this crusade has either wound up dead or missing. He even mentions Deckers who go missing but show up later, changed somehow. He's convinced she's alive, operating in secret, and very eager to get rid of anyone who may know of her. So now we have a crazed dragon hunting us. The last stage of the setup is contacting a master informant named Alice and making a deal with her to find as much information as we can on the Firewing, Volclair, and the Orc. Unfortunately, her services come with a hell of a price tag. Which means we've got to get to work. Of all the weird and wonderful things I got exposed to in this game, the highlight of it all was having my own special team of runners working with me. Each of these guys is something of a mystery to unravel throughout the game, but taking the time to get to know them is going to enrich your game no end and even provide you with useful mechanical upgrades that will make them more effective on runs. It's a similar system to what games like Mass Effect and Dragon Age or other RPGs of that ilk use. Basically, make sure to talk to everyone between runs, including your dog, because oh boy does this guy have a surprise for you later on. Mechanically, you'll be able to upgrade your team between major milestone missions. In order to scrape together the cash to pay for Alice's premium services, you'll be taking part in 4 to 5 high-risk, high-reward runs, and getting your crew in and out alive is going to strengthen their abilities and their connection with you. There isn't an official loyalty system that I'm aware of, but one of the topics you can cover in your dialogue trees is, what did you think of that last run? It's only flavor text really, but it adds to the role-playing element of you being these badass runners just talking shop in your downtime. When you hit a milestone, you'll basically get to pick one of 2 upgrades for each member of your team. Choosing one will permanently lock you out of the other. These reflect certain paths that our runner is going down. Dietrich, for example, can get more explosive attack spells or better support spells. While it's nice to be able to drop a fireball on folks now and then, in a world of miniguns and grenade launchers, I personally found support spells far more useful in tipping the balance in my favour. It would have been nice if upgrading from certain paths had effects on the character's personality, but I understand that's asking a lot for a low budget game. Jumping ahead to Hong Kong for a moment. One of my best bros there was Gaichu. Yeah, I'm a massive weeb, I know. He's an ex-Red Samurai from the Renraku Contacting Communications Company. He's also a ghoul, but one lucky enough to maintain all his mental faculties, and have significant control over his hunger. His upgrade paths either give you more katana stances and attacks which draw from his training as a Red Samurai. His coup de grace attack was absolutely invaluable by the way. Or abilities that come from his ghoulish heritage. It would have been cool to have his personality shift into something more dangerous and feral by taking the latter upgrade path, but that's a lot of extra dialogue to write and a whole bunch of if statements to code. Our crew on Dragonfall are Dietrich, the Elven Shaman, whose spirit guide is the Dragon Slayer, pretty useful all things considered. Iga, an ex-military troll sniper with a real chip on her shoulder. Glory, a heavily augmented razor girl who doubles as our medic. And we can eventually recruit my boy Blitz, who's something of a hotshot decker with a bit of a bad luck streak. While things have a tendency to go wrong for the poor guy, he always seems to hack his way out of it. Later in the game, our good boy Dante shows his true colours and becomes a playable character, though even if that wasn't the case, I'd expect everyone here to take time to pet him, give him treats, and just look at your monitor and tell him what a good boy he is. I'd hate to have to come to your homes and educate you on why not doing that is bad for your long-term health, but it's a price I'm willing to pay to see a dog happy.
Oh, you're such a good boy, Dante. Look at your silly face.
Dietrich is probably the first to open up to us. Being older and somewhat more worldly and mature, you may be surprised to find he was once the leader of a punk metal band and a full-blown anarchist in his youth. The Dragonslayer totem is one that rewards action and inciting change. Most people bound to it don't live to retire at a ripe old age and die in their bed surrounded by their loved ones. So suffice to say, this guy has had quite the life and seen a lot of shit. He's not some heartless killer who's just here for the payday either, and is more than happy to let you know that when difficult decisions come up during quests. His companion mission is also one that just drops onto our lap. A relatively early mission sees us going up against Humanus, a meta-human hate group who've decided that all their problems aren't the result of super powerful corporations born from unchecked ultra-capitalism that breeds massive systemic inequality and keeps the rich rich and the poor poor, but rather they are all caused by dwarves, elves and orcs, and they want to purge them from existence in a bid to make the sixth world great again, or something.
Human, you work hard, you play fair, and you still can't get ahead. But have you ever wondered why? The answer is simple. The elf is using the orc and the troll as muscle against you.
Since it's easier to blame your problems on enemies you perceive as weaker than yourself instead of nebulous and overwhelming political and corporate powers, or for the love of God take responsibility for your own problems, prejudices of all kind abound in the Sixth World, and it's a regular theme in these stories. Humanus were thrown out of Berlin a long time ago, and Dietrich was right there on the front line when things were going down. Suffice to say, he's not happy to see them back, but worse still, his nephew seems to have fallen in with them. It's important to remember here that there are people alive at this time who remember a world before magic and dragons. First generation elves are a genetic variation of humans that were born of human mothers, so Dietrich having a human nephew isn't any kind of stretch. The standoff at the end of this section is honestly nerve-wracking. I was absolutely terrified that I'd have to open fire on this kid, as I wasn't exactly a high charisma smooth talker. Fortunately, I was able to get a good resolution to this whole affair, and both Dietrich and the Dragonslayer greatly approved. Humanus, not so much, but I can't really say that I care for what anyone like that thinks about me. I'll talk about Glory next because she's my girl. Not in any romantic way, just to be clear. There are no romance paths in these games, but I love this girl. Since I was an up-close fighter in battle, Glory wasn't as useful to me as Iga in a scrap, but she always has extra medkits which makes her a good choice for missions with a lot of combat. Glory appears disconnected emotionally, and on a run she's all business. She's also heavily, almost dangerously so, augmented. Let's take another mechanical detour here for a moment. Playing as a physical adept, I got a better taste of the magic system in this game. It's nothing too complicated. After you've acquired the specific skill level to use a certain ability, you just need to head to a magic shop and buy the required spells. Well, well, well. Look who it is again. You do get around, don't you, sir? Spells have their own slot system the same as inventory, so you can only have so many spells or abilities available at any given time. For adepts there are some always-on passive buffs, but others need to be activated, and each ability has its own cooldown time. Between runs of course you can switch things up, but you'll probably have a few go-to abilities that you bring along all the time. In that regard, I definitely hit a ceiling with my adept where I didn't really need to buy any more powers. By the mid-game, if not before, I had my system all set up, and I didn't really need to change things around. This is probably a weakness of the combat too. While there are some tactical elements to battle, your main options are fight and move to cover. The extra karma could have been used to branch my character out into something more diverse, I guess, but I was more concerned with keeping my hit chance percentage as high as possible. You may be asking, why am I bringing all this up now when only a moment ago I was talking about our best cyborg girl here? Well, you see, in Shadowrun, augmentation is the bane of magic. Carving off pieces of yourself and replacing it with metal will damage your essence, and this damage is irreversible. Lose too much essence and you might barely be considered a living thing. It's a hell of a price to pay just for a laser cannon in your chest. So Glory's excessive augmentation, especially on such a young girl, well, they're dangerous, and they stand out. Glory takes the longest to bring out of her shell. She's not just keeping her past to herself, She's almost severed herself from her humanity. Why would she do that, you ask? Well, she has the devil chasing after her. It's kind of complicated how this actually works, but we are specifically talking about God's adversary and not some other horned god or spirit. No problem. I've dealt with that guy before. We've already encountered a cult before in Returns, so it shouldn't come as much as a surprise that these things aren't all that uncommon. As Auntie Cheng points out at the end of Shadowrun Hong Kong, if a demon queen took up residence in the heart of Kowloon Walled City, it'd be news for about a week. Then everyone would just get used to the fact that a demon queen lives in the heart of Kowloon Walled City and adjust their lives around the new normal. Glory's father basically joined a fascist group that made life hell for metahumans and magic users. There's that politics seeping in again. When Glory manifested magical talent of her own, her father beat her until she was nearly dead. Her tale is one of running away from home, falling in love, and finally feeling like she'd found a place in a group with a charismatic leader called Harrow. You can probably imagine the rest of the story. Harrow has big ideas and a way of wrapping people around his little finger, and somehow, without her realizing it, she became involved with indoctrinating and even straight up abusing members of the group. I won't spoil it all, but Glory eventually broke free of the cult, and to purge herself of the hold the devil had on her soul, she ripped out her essence and magical talent with orgs, and now lives as a Shadowrunner. In her companion mission, we have the chance to go after Harrow and try to save the people who were important in Glory's life. We actually have to choose between getting the kids whom Harrow has indoctrinated out of the cult, or going through them to get at Harrow. Either way, we wind up in an awesome final battle with the twisted totem that Harrow is drawing his power from, and even get to give him a few shots for good measure. Ultimately, I chose to let Harrow flee to spare the cultists. While he now has a chance to start again elsewhere, I simply can't see how making more bodies is going to make the world better. Suffice to say, me and Lucian the Divine don't see eye to eye on the concept of the greater good. More isometric RPG goodness here. While Iga is very antagonistic at the start, she is very quick to apologize when she sees what happened to Green Winters. She was very close to Monica, though not close enough to know about her relationship to her best friend protagonist, and took her death badly. This is completely understandable. She takes a bit of work to open up. She's ex-military, pragmatic, and has no patience for indirect talk. Tell her you just want to know the people you're trusting your life with, and she'll relent and tell you about her days in the German military. She's ex-special forces, and she and her team took huge chunks out of a human trafficking ring. Unfortunately, stupidity saw a rich kid with no experience forced into their number, and this decision wound up fatal to all but Iga and the rookie in question. So that's another reason she wasn't happy about what she thinks is an unknown quantity being invited to that first run, and why she refers to the protagonist as Rookie. Her loyalty mission isn't as wild as Glory's. It involves tracking down one of her old targets, who has heavy connections to organized crime, and exacting some revenge on him. But it was a good time. In combat, Iga wields a sniper rifle, which is the only weapon that becomes more accurate when used at greater range, and becomes harder to hit with the closer you get. She actually adds something very unique to your team in the way she can take up position in relative safety and back up close and mid-range units from there. As such, she became a mainstay in the party, more so than Glory. I also love how her codename comes from the Iga. You know, the mountain from the Clint Eastwood movie? Big, beautiful, and dangerous to climb. But goddamn, if I could, I probably would try. Blitz is the last person to join up with you. Since you lose your decker in the opening mission, a spot has opened up, and unless the protagonist is a keyboard cowboy, you're going to need this guy around as well. He also has a drone that he can bring to the fight, letting him pull double duty as the team decker and rigger. It's very easy to like Blitz. Similar to Dietrich, he's actually quite friendly and chatty, and refers to you as Chief in a very charming way. He's grateful that you bust him out of hotel imprisonment too. While his loyalty mission is a simple matter of settling some debts, well, it's not that simple. He pitches it as a milk run and things constantly go wrong the whole time. His real story is something we uncover after. It concerns his one great love with another decker, who not only vanished from his life with all his money one day, but literally deleted herself from the Matrix not long after. Blitz hasn't really been able to move on from this, and is hurting for the lack of closure in this chapter of his life. I'm unhappy to report that I completely screwed up this part of the Blitz arc. I pushed him to find this girl and his closure, even after we'd reached a point where she finally breaks contact and begs him to stop. I guess because I'm playing an RPG, I thought, oh, damsel in distress. But I had my expectations subverted to say the least. I'm not actually going to spoil this one. Go play it and see how you feel at the time. Are you going to push ahead, or respect the lady's wishes? So that's our squad. They're not the biggest or the best, but they're mine. And we've been through hell together. Another new feature of Dragonfall is the personal computer we get access to in our base. This is primarily for receiving missions and collecting our pay, but we also gain some info on our teammates and have access to the Shadowlands bulletin boards. Reddit and LinkedIn don't exist in Shadowrun, so we have these old style bulletin boards where Shadowrunners can post data for sales that they steal on runs and just chat about what's going on in the world. The more memorable of these threads are definitely the ones in Hong Kong. There's this long running gag about a team needing a decker for a milk run, and with each new posting there's this increasingly longer string of very specific, very stupid things the decker must not do to join the team, implying that each decker finds some increasingly dumb way to yeet themselves on the run. This climaxes after several rounds when you see this. Oh damn, sorry to hear that, guys. Well, that's running. It's a nice feature, being not only functional for quests, but also just adding to the world building. You'll occasionally catch people on there talking about your exploits too. The majority of the missions we go on aren't very clean cut at all. In fact, I probably alienated myself from the majority of clients who approached me, and an entire secret society that was offering me money to run errands for them. Those guys in particular are the kind of big picture, greater good, the ends always justify the means types that I have little patience for. A couple of interesting examples involve a job to steal a new type of weapon from a lab and deliver it to another. Seems straightforward enough until you realize the weapon in question is a troll that's had a lot of illegal augmentation done to them, turning them into a combat slave cyborg. Worse still, you get the impression that he's very aware of the situation he's now in and is completely locked into his body and unable to do anything about it. By the end of this mission, after we've fought our way through various teams of guards, some of which have hackers in their number who can take control of this walking death machine, we're left with a choice. We could deliver the troll alive to our client, deliver it to our conspiracy guys, who would fully reimburse us for the mission, with a bonus, or put the poor guy out of his misery. I took the fourth option, and gave autonomy of his body back to the troll, which it promptly used to yeet itself. I loaded the remains into our delivery van and sent them on the way to the client. I don't know what to tell you guys, be clear about what you're hiring me to do, and I'll complete the operation to your specifications. I still got paid, but those bridges were well and truly burnt. Another job is to clean up after a cloak and dagger job gone wrong. It seems a security team broke into a rival company facility to do damage and steal data, and all but one member got killed. The survivor is currently being held prisoner, and it's only a matter of time before he talks. This person is considered disposable. This isn't a rescue operation. You go in, you silence the captive, you leave. Pretty dark, but that's life in the shadows. As we explore this place, we find evidence of the previous shootout, but also what seems to be some fairly gruesome deaths of a different kind. It's hard to figure out exactly what's going on, but when you find the bodies of the previous team, you realize they're not corporate security, but Shadowrunners. Well, that's just the job, right? Has anything really changed? They were here to get paid, you're here to get paid, so no big deal, right? Still, something is very off about all this. When we meet our prisoner, we discover that he is indeed a rigger for a Shadowrunner team. He seems to understand his situation, but makes you a very straightforward offer. Money for his life. Seems fair. I get paid, and I get to stick it to the corpos for not being straight with their mission brief. When we're making our escape, however, certain things start to fall into place. You see, our rigger is a kind of decker-rigger hybrid. He takes over a building's security system and uses their own defenses against them. He's actually eager to point out areas where he went above and beyond and subjected various non-combatants to gruesome deaths at the hands of these systems. I realized I'd made a mistake. This guy is sick, and it's his antiques that jeopardized the previous mission. As we approach the front door, agents of our employer burst in to make sure we're holding up our end of the bargain. I casually turned on the rescued prisoner and blew him away in a manner that suggested I wanted my employer to see where their hard-earned money was being spent. I admit they weren't exactly sold on my sincerity, but I got paid, and the world is down one sicko. Our mission computer isn't the only source of operations though. The residents of Kreyas Bazaar also need help from time to time. Monica was something of a local linchpin and unofficial mayor. When people had problems, they often came to her in search of solutions. Since you're the de facto Monica now, you kinda get this community odd jobs man status too. Of the standouts here, we have a problem with the sewage system that needs fixing. Now, sewage is probably the invention that has saved more lives than any other, so this isn't something to take lightly. Heading down into the tunnels with our crew, we soon discover feral ghouls roaming the area. That explains what happened to the repair people anyway. Unfortunately, the situation becomes more complicated when we reach the heart of the ghoul nest, and they start talking to us. Ghouls and vampires, etc., are people who contracted a particular strain of one of the Six Worlds' new viruses. It's entirely possible for the virus to destroy the brain of the host and leave them as a slavering monster, but that isn't always the case. Similar to Fallout, there are plenty of ghouls who are perfectly normal, people who just happen to eat human flesh. Kinda like that one priest guy in Don't Nod's Vampire. They explain that Monica had struck a deal with the Ripper Doc in the area. The good doctor was paid to provide recently carved off body parts or freshly made corpses to the ghouls, and they in turn kept their feral kin in check and performed maintenance on the sewage processing machines. It's no problem for them as they can't actually get sick anymore, and since even sentient ghouls are hated and hunted wherever they go, they get a home, a job, and a purpose. They're part of a community, and they get fed without actually having to act like monsters. Since Monica's death though, the good doctor has decided he wants to renegotiate his contract. He figures he got the short end of the stick as he loses money on what he gives to the ghouls. I'm not saying he's wrong to put his business interests first, but it's incredibly short-sighted not to see the benefits of a functioning sewage system, how it benefits the whole community, and keeps things stable here, allowing him to have a surgery in a nice part of the city that would be easily accessible for his customers. Were this place to become uninhabitable and the community to move on, he could find himself with nothing but junkies and gangers for his neighbours, and I don't think he'd be catering to high-roller clientele in that situation. There are various ways to defuse the situation, and I opted for a gentler approach that benefited everyone. This also led to the good doctor entrusting me with another mission that turned out to be one of the most hilarious moments in the game. I won't say too much, but let's just say being locked alone in a lab for years with only a dozen or so episodes of one soap to keep you entertained is going to leave its mark on you.
I am Philip Rex, the Night King of Suterland Bioscience. I will have you banished for your transgression, sir. Banished to the underworld and left to the ravages of all-powerful Billy. Hold still while I fetch the robots that will banish you.
One mission I picked up around Krayas Bazaar involved tracking down a stolen weapon shipment. This led us into another more stable settlement in the area, though this one was considerably poorer and located in an old subway station. And now I want to play Metro. Anyway, so our perps turn out to be runners just like us, who were hitting a transport for a payday. This wasn't any kind of personal attack on us, and on any other day, the tables could easily be turned. Well, sucks to be them, huh? They've got my stuff and I want it back, so they better hand it over or else, right? That's definitely a road you can take. After all, if you're seen letting people walk all over you, then others will think you're easy prey. But that kind of thinking isn't going to change the world, and happy neighbours could become future allies. So we reached a compromise. They'd care not to step on our toes in the future, and we'd open ourselves up to an alliance. And who can really say if I was right? It's left open and up to you. But I don't need a subway full of ghosts haunting me, whose only real crime was living the exact same life that I live. I may be a criminal for hire, but I'm no hypocrite. So, hopefully by this point you can see just how much richer and deeper the world building and storytelling is in Dragonfall. There's a lot of scope to roleplay a certain type of character, and a lot of choices that aren't anywhere near as clean cut as they first seem. And that continues all the way into the endgame. It seems even our master informant Alice is in over her head on this one, as while she's happy to deliver on her end of the deal, she's not down to interact with us in any way whatsoever, beyond recording a message and shipping our goods to us. Something is tracking her through the Matrix, something that's got even her scared. Unfortunately, we aren't going to find out about that until we save Krayas Bazaar from an attack by our orc and his goon squad. I loved this whole section. We're unfortunately too late to save Paul, which actually stung me a lot more than I expected at the time, but our mission is to unite the squad and take care of business. This is also where Dante shows his true colours and becomes a selectable party member.
That's right, Dante, you're a good boy.
Beating back the soldiers and stopping their plans to level the whole area, we have our impromptu funeral for a fixer, and then get to work unpacking the data from Alice. There's various information on Volclair, the Firewing, and most interestingly, a one-of-a-kind matrix security AI called the Apex. This isn't your average ICE that only responds to threats that come into its domain. It's a hunter. It keeps an eye on anyone interested in the Firewing and removes anyone who gets too close. This is what got Monica and Green Winters. Luckily, Alice has found a back door into the thing and thinks we can shut it down for good. So we need to talk about the mission Apex Rising. Not for any specific narrative reasons, it's got choices too, as what's left of Monica's digital ghost is now a part of Apex, and more importantly, it seems to be in control. That is to say that Monica's desires, chiefly the preservation of the flux state, have been imprinted onto Apex. It wants to escape its own captivity and work to help the flux state. Of course, it's a gamble if you trust it, but that's been par for the course in all these great missions, so everything is up to standard here. However, we've got to talk about this game because... yeah, there's a game-breaking bug that has never been addressed by the developers. I did find one response from them saying they were struggling to recreate the bug, but the problem is still there even more than 10 years after the game's release. In my case, the mission was divided into a matrix run for Blitz, who was backed by Monica Apex, who suddenly became absurdly gimped now she was on my side, and a stand your ground fight with the rest of my guys who were defending various terminals. After a few rounds, I found that I had to wait longer and longer between turns in the Matrix. The game wasn't frozen, idle animations were playing, but I couldn't interact with anything at all. Eventually, not only would the game crash, but the save would be yeeted in the process. Yes, it's the absolute worst kind of bug, so if you haven't been using multiple save slots up to this point, you'd better be now. God, I had so much rage at this scene. I got fed up of skipping through this random text again and again, and I'm not kidding when I said I was ready to just abandon this whole project and do a completely different game. Fortunately, a helpful Redditor figured it out. The specifics aren't that important, but to put it simply, you must not save during this fight. Saving mid-combat is a feature introduced in this game. The previous locked you out, probably to stop you from saving yourself into a corner. Since Dragonfall autosaves at the start of a combat, you should always have a fallback if that happens, so no big deal. But saving after a certain point in this battle is what causes the bug. Check the thread for yourself if you want, but that's it. Immediately after clearing this section, I was ready to write a good 5 minutes of screaming about how irresponsible it is for a studio to not fix a bug this bad. I get that the bug yeeting your saves is a huge issue. It's not like people who submitted a complaint could attach their save files, but that doesn't make it any less the developer's responsibility to solve. Still, I can't hold a grudge. Game development is not easy, and it's not just games like Stalker that are held together with hopes and dreams and a lot of duct tape. So, all is forgiven. If you've had this problem, I hope this information helps you. Our final mission sees us return to Harfeld Manor. That's right, our enemies were there all along. The big twist though, is it's not the Firewing who's the big bad mastermind, but Volclair himself. He found the dragon's body, but her astral essence was torn from her and now resides in the body of this poor captive woman here. The short version of his master plan is that he's created a virus that specifically kills dragons, and he's planning to use the Firewing as the delivery system. Berlin is going to get roasted in the process, because how else are they going to get us involved? But this is another of those greater good plans where the threat of the dragons is so overwhelming that those lost in these flames are a small price to pay for the potential suffering that could be avoided this way. Of course, like everyone who thinks that death, mass deportation, eugenics and other appalling practices are the answer to life's problems, they do so because they are convinced that it won't actually affect them or anyone they care about personally. Volclair has no idea that his brother was killed by his own internet security. He turned an incredibly dangerous AI loose on the world, and gave it the discretion to murder anyone who was simply talking about topics he didn't want discussed, without ever considering that his own brother would be one of the people in the danger zone. He is greatly distraught to discover his brother's death. We can actually pull a Mass Effect 1 here, and have him see the error of his ways, but even in that scenario, we aren't getting out of a final showdown with our big orc boy. Dragonfall has multiple endings. The majority of these are chosen after the final battle. Before that, there's an option to side with Volclair, but no one else on your team will be cool with that, and you'll have to fight them to the death. For most of us though, we'll be left in the control of the fate of this dragon, and indeed, if this virus really does what it's supposed to do, the other dragons. I probably did the least punk thing imaginable, and reunited the Firewing spirit with her body, let her escape and return to her slumber until the next cycle. She may have murdered thousands of people, but she had clearly suffered enough for her crimes. I likewise wasn't down with releasing a virus, with no idea what it'll do once it's in the atmosphere. Those things mutate, you know. Even when Apex told me she could perfect the formula and there would be no potential negatives, I still couldn't do it. Pull a gun on me on the job and sure, I'll cut you down, but genocide isn't my bag. So, in a way, I defended the status quo, which is fine for all those powerful dragons and corpos because that means they get to keep oppressing and exploiting everyone. Yay, anarchy! And that's Dragonfall, an absolutely amazing isometric RPG with a wonderful cast of characters, a world full of rich and interesting stories, and one game-breaking bug that had me screaming at my monitor. I cannot recommend this game enough to all you RPG lovers out there. We get a little epilogue at the end of the game, and some of what happens there will depend on the choices you made throughout the game. Apex certainly wasn't happy with me, and unfortunately the Flux State didn't survive the machinations of Lufia in the end. So maybe I should have moved to End All Dragons. I actually wound up on a train with a very interesting figure claiming to represent the Great Dragon himself. It seems I made an impression and he had work for me, but Shadowrunners have a rule about deals and dragons. So I guess you're all wondering if it can get any better than this, right? Well, that depends on who you ask. A lot of people will tell you that Hong Kong is the best of these games. It had the benefit of a second Kickstarter that brought another $1 million into the development fund. They only actually wanted $100K, but the fan reception to the previous two games meant they were dying for more, and more than happy to front the cash. Remember, the story of this game's development takes place in the same reality where EA and Ubisoft can't figure out why no one is buying their games. What's that, Sven?
They didn't make it to increase market share. They didn't make it to serve as a brand. They didn't have to meet arbitrary sales targets or fear being laid off if they didn't meet those targets.
So with money in the coffers and all the designers now firmly on the ball, that left them primed to create the best version of this game yet. For me personally though, Dragonfall was the peak. I'm not sure why. Maybe I just vibed with the characters and the scenario a little better, and Berlin is something of a rarity for games that aren't about murdering Nazis. Hong Kong is a very close second though. So let's take a look at why. Hong Kong is the first of our games to have any kind of opening cinematic. It's done in this awesome painterly style and sets a grim tone for what's to come. We see an old man sitting in a cafe as he narrates a letter to his foster sons. The letter seems quite desperate. Something from his past is chasing him down, and he's finally decided to return to Hong Kong to face up to it. He's begging his two foster kids to come and help him. This sounds really heavy. Unfortunately, before he can meet up with these characters, a kill team, led by an ominous figure with a facial augmentation, intercepts him. One of the cooler things about Hong Kong is that it's very much the start of a new story. During the opening hours of the game, you'll be asked several questions related to your past, and you have several choices you can use to flesh out your character's backstory. Our protagonists this time are our beautiful selves and our orc foster brother, Duncan. Our hero, I chose Adapt again, it's too much fun, and Duncan have been separated for quite a while, and their lives have gone in quite different directions. So when they finally have time to catch up, that's when we get hit with those questions about our background. This is a far more organic way than just asking these questions in the character creator, and I think I'd like to see a little more of this in RPGs that let you create your own character. In the previous two games, we were established professional runners, but at the start of this game, Duncan is actually a cop working for Lone Star, and we are... Again, that's complicated. I went with the idea that I'd been locked up in a corporate black site and left to rot there until a change of administration led to the prison becoming something they didn't want to finance anymore, and all the inmates being kicked back onto the streets with a new set of clothes and 1,000 or so new yen in their pocket to try and start a better life. What a truly incredible idea it is to take things that should be handled by governments and taxpayer money and hand them over to publicly traded for-profit companies who prioritize their shareholders' value over everything else. This less than idealistic reunion is the result of answering Raymond's summons. It seems whatever bad blood exists between this odd family, there are still some bonds there. Our hero and Duncan were orphans in the Seattle Barrens, that hellhole we talked about earlier in the first game. They fell in with the gangs and had very violent young lives, until they were picked off the street by a man from Hong Kong, given a roof over their heads, an education, and a lot of moral berating. We also established early on that our characters are all speaking Cantonese, and that our hero isn't very good at it. Duncan is a rising Lone Star officer. Contract law enforcement may be corrupt and mostly just puppets of the corporations who hold the purse strings, but that doesn't mean there aren't good people and idealists actually trying to make the world a better, safer place within it. He shows up with his partner, superior, and possibly bedroom dominatrix, Carter. Our opening scene has us approaching a rendezvous point, where instead of linking up with our old Chinese foster father, we encounter a party of mixed-race DEI hire misfits rocking custom hardware and wearing their attitudes on their sleeves. These guys are Shadowrunners.
Evening, folks. You got permits for those bazookas? Permits? Give me a minute. Nope. Must have dropped mine in a dumpster, along with the last idiot who stepped to us.
After a pretty intense standoff, it's revealed that Raymond hired the guys to come with us and be our muscle within the Kowloon Walled City 2.0. This is a big moment for Duncan, who always saw Raymond as a straight shooter. How could the guy who turned a homeless ganger with a violent streak a mile long into a respectable Lone Star officer have the kind of underworld connections that would enable him to commission the worst kind of criminals the underworld can spew out? Perhaps we'll find out when Raymond actually gets here. Unfortunately, waiting around for him proves to be quite an unhealthy move, as sniper fire takes out two of the runners and Carter in a heartbeat, and we are thrust into the game's first action set piece. Hong Kong does not pull any punches, I promise you, and this opening scene actually filtered me the first time I played it. You need to charge down a street with the Hong Kong police force closing in all around you. To top it off, any character who isn't in cover during the enemy turn is going to be hit by sniper fire and lose the majority of their health in the process. You'd think the way the fight started would have clued me into the extra danger the first time I played, but no, I went charging out into the open to battle enemies and very quickly got my ass handed to me for my trouble. Once we're able to punch through the enemy line, we can escape into a sewer where we get a real dose of just how much trouble we're in. It's bad, guys. Like, real bad. Our faces and names, along with that of the Orc Shaman Gobbet and the Dwarf Decker Girl Isobel, are plastered all over the news. We are now Falons wanted for terrorism, and an APB has been put out on us. In the world of Shadowrun, that's as good as having $1 million new yen price tag on your head, dead or alive. As soon as someone sees you, you're going to be very dead, very quickly. Isabel? That we need to slag our PDAs ASAP, as we can be tracked that way, and we'd also better forget about tapping into any resources from our old lives. You see, everyone in the Sixth World has a SIN, or System Identification Number. This is provided to you at birth, and you carry it around with you your entire life. Every product you buy, every account you make for a service, every job you have, everywhere you go, that number is completely integrated into your life, creating a seamless and perfect record for corporations and law enforcement to track, and possibly make some informed predictions about where you might show up in the future. It's considered very bad form, to say the least, for a Shadowrunner or other criminals to have a SIN. Since a lot of runs involve infiltrating or attacking corporate assets, you need to be ghosts to the machine, recognizable only by your codenames and the exploits that make up your Shadowrunner legend. In the Shadowrun tabletop rulebook, having a SIN is considered a major character flaw, as it makes your runner very easy to locate, and they're expensive to get rid of. I can see how a particularly clever criminal might be able to exploit the system though. What's that, officer? The Barons? No, of course not. A fine upstanding citizen would never frequent such a place. But don't take my word for it. The GPS in my PDA that's accessed via my SIN has a complete and accurate record of all my comings and goings. But operators that smooth are going to be few and far between. Still, if our heroes want to live to see the end of the week, let alone figure out what the hell is going on, they're going to need to burn their sins, and to do that, they're going to need the help of a high-ranking organized crime official. Fortunately, our two little survivors here just so happen to work for a triad boss called Kindly Cheng. He is hoping this doesn't wind up costing us too much, or worse still, leading us to get in over our heads. Miss Cheng isn't exactly happy to find out that two of her best Shadowrunners are dead, and two people she could consider responsible for said deaths, and whom both have the Hong Kong police force hunting them down, are standing in front of her. But Miss Kindley Cheng, or Auntie Cheng to her friends and anyone she's dominating in the bedroom, is a businesswoman, an opportunist, and a sucker for an orc with a big pair of arms it seems. She sees potential. After all, you're both survivors, Duncan has Lone Star training, you're from out of town and desperate enough to put your trust in her. You might be exactly what she's looking for, and it just so happens that a couple of spots have opened up on her personal Shadowrunner team. All you need to do is prove you're a good fit for the job. You see, one of her trusted enforcers, a man named Strangler Bao, odd first name to give your child unless you have some preconceived ideas about the career path, but okay, has decided he's done taking orders from Auntie Cheng and has declared his independence from her. He and a lot of her men are now holed up inside the Kowloon walled city, where they're shaking down the locals for protection money. Auntie Cheng doesn't want these people, or indeed Mr. Bao, harmed. She simply wants them returned to the fold. I love this. It's one of the first completely non-combat missions I've come up against since beginning this whole adventure in the 6th world, so I was totally down to get in there and get to work. Okay guys, time for a history lesson. The original Kowloon walled city has appeared in a few movies and video games, so I'd wager that plenty of us here know about it to some degree. But I figured I'd do a very brief history lesson here for those that are completely in the dark about this. And I mean very brief. The Kowloon walled city was a triad-controlled slum in the former British Hong Kong that around 1980 housed somewhere in the region of 35,000 people in an area of around 2.6 hectares. It was an incredibly densely populated space that was, more or less, lawless in all the regular ways such as drugs and vice, and some amusing ways like unlicensed dentistry and slaughterhouses. How things got that way is quite the story in and of itself, but we'll limit this particular historical journey to about as far back as 1945, after the surrender of Japan and the rise of the Chinese Civil War. Around this time, about 2,000 refugees fled and settled into this area. Attempts by the British to drive them out of what was at the time considered part of their territory, a state of affairs that came about some time before because of opium. No, really, we fought 2 wars with China over this stuff. Didn't go so well. Basically, law enforcement expected to be displacing a disorganized mob of squatters, and instead found themselves face to face with 2,000 angry, desperate Chinese people who had survived World War II, the rise of communism, and just wanted a chance to make some kind of life for themselves. After a few days of getting pelted by stones and not having anything resembling a jolly good time, the British opted for a hands-off approach to the whole area. They weren't really and had never done anything with the land anyway, so why waste the energy? Eventually, China sent the British a strongly worded letter saying, hey, we own this now, as that was what the original terms of the agreement were, and after some deliberation, the British agreed to let them have it in principle, providing they didn't actually exercise any jurisdiction over it. So you've got the Chinese who can't do anything with it, and the British who won't, and a lot of squatters trying to etch out a desperate new life with minimal resources stuck in the middle of all this. So we basically have a slum that is completely unregulated. This is where the triads come into it. Since they were organized and strong, they took on the role of government. And don't go thinking it was all shakedowns and beatings. No. They handled sewage maintenance and garbage collection, organized a firefighting service and schools, and even paid out pensions to the elderly who lived there. Despite the strong criminal element, a lot of construction happened in the 1960s. While the British weren't going to try and evict the settlers in the walled city anymore, they certainly weren't going to let the borders spread, which meant development could only go up. This created this high-rise enclave of makeshift houses and winding dark alleys that people mostly associate with the walled city today. This was the self-contained urban labyrinth that we see featured in various video games and movies, and also formed the basis for various science fiction sprawl-like cityscapes. A massive series of police raids in the 1970s saw the criminal element within the city finally being brought under control. Now, it's important to understand that while the walled city was a hub of organized crime, that doesn't make everyone who lived there a criminal. In fact, most people were just trying to live the best life they could while living in squalor. Many families shared cramped living spaces while operating shops out of the front. In fact, the walled city was quite famous for its street food. Even so, the sanitation and safety of the city was far behind the rest of Hong Kong, and in the 80s, a demolition and relocation plan was put into play that eventually saw the whole area being turned into a park. I've actually been there. It's pretty nice. This particular story actually makes me think of Martinez in Disco Elysium. What, you thought I was going to talk about some isometric CRPGs and not bring up this banger? Similar to the walled city, Martinez was simply left to fend for itself in the aftermath of a war, and found itself slap in the middle of a territorial pissing match that led to the people just having to govern themselves and handle their own law enforcement. In the case of Martinez, there are more malicious motivations for leaving it to fend for itself, but the outcome was more or less the same. So, Shadowrun Hong Kong's walled city is a new beast in and of itself, but one that has, for plot reasons, fallen into the same spiral of poverty and crime, and in this case, much, much worse. We only venture into the outskirts during our first mission to find Strangler Bao, but what we find there doesn't leave anything like a good impression. The place isn't just a slum, there's something fundamentally wrong here. Remember that ki and magic are very real things in the Sixth World, so when people talk about spiritual corruption, they really mean it. The very land here is poison, and the people who live here inhale it, grow sick from it, and ultimately wither and die from it. Everything here is dirty, and cobbled together from parts salvaged from other parts of the city. We actually encounter a university student who's been trying to study the bad energies here, and even thought that with a little feng shui, they could help improve the lives of the people. They become incredibly sick though, and helping them out is one of our earliest side gigs. Still, nothing seems able to change the flow of negative energy through this miserable hellhole. We have a few options for dealing with Strangler Bao, but I went with the most non-violent one. This was partly to engage with some different game mechanics, but also just to make a good impression on Auntie Cheng. Her message for Bao is somewhat chilling, and brings our intimidating new gang leader back to heel very quickly. Returning from a job well done, we are rewarded with both information on our situation and potential enemies. Officially, Raymond is dead, and Auntie Cheng is even able to pull security camera footage showing the mysterious plastic-faced man. Even so, the footage cuts out before we can be sure what exactly happened. With our transaction complete, our sins are burned, but that doesn't mean our enemies have stopped looking for us, and there are books to balance. So we are given a couple of beds on a boat that's moored in Haoi Harbour. These once belonged to the two runners who got taken out in the opening scene. Here's hoping they aren't bad luck. The boat is our home and new base of operations in Haoi, and its community are our new Kreyas Bazaar. What really sold me on this was the music though. After singing tens of hours into Shadowrun Dragonfall, this little earworm that played around the home base had well and truly buried itself in my subconscious. So when the music in Hong Kong did this, it honestly felt like someone was saying, "Welcome home." I get exactly the same vibe when I hear the theme for Bellum Garden in Final Fantasy VIII. We get the first of several dream sequences that night. Most of them are only mentioned in text, but here we see something powerful and malevolent calling us from the heart of the walled city. When we awaken the next day and return to the Mahjong parlour, Miss Cheng has a proposition for us. As I said, Auntie is an opportunist and she sees potential. The player character and Duncan are going to be her new runners, with the player becoming the leader of the team. Isobel is a great decker, but like most people who'd rather spend their time in a digital simulation of the world, she really isn't much of a people person. Gobbert likewise is very young. Duncan is certainly an intimidating presence, but he says himself he needs someone to keep him in check. He still has issues with his temper, and works better when someone is telling him where to direct that. So, that leaves us. I actually really like the part here where they talk about code names. There's been something of a running gag where Duncan has been referred to as Gunshow on account of his swole arms, and he very quickly realises that the more he complains about this, the more people are just going to call him that. He's clearly been hazed before. So of course when the subject of codenames comes up, he resigns to the fact that his has already been chosen for him. It sort of reminds me of the first time Doc showed up in Red vs. Blue.
It's settled then. Your name is now Doc.
Alright, but I don't think it'll stick.
So, much like with Dragonfall, our biggest problem is intel on our primary enemy and their motivations. Gunshow, I'm sorry bro, but come on, at least it's complimentary, is quite sure that Raymond isn't dead either. It's more just a hunch at this time, but nothing about this makes sense to him. So while Auntie Cheng and her network of triad hackers and other sinless criminals get to work digging up intel for us, we've got to pay the rent. So just like before, we'd better get to work running the shadows. Our unlikely best friends for this adventure are Gobbet, an orc shaman whose totem is rat, and yes, she has 2 adorable pet rats. A dwarf named Isobel, with the O being a 0 because she's a decker, and on the boat we can make one more acquaintance in the form of Rakta. He's our rigger and has a full custom drone with a completely unique suite of abilities. He's from Russia originally, so like us, he's very far from home. He's not part of the original crew, but can be coerced into working with us quite easily. During one of our first missions, we have a chance to recruit Gaichu into our team. He's an ex-Red samurai who was cast out of his unit after contracting the human metahuman vampiric virus. Basically, he's a ghoul. Japan in the 6th world has something of a racial purity thing going on, and Gaichu was expected to take his own life after he turned. This led to something of a philosophical disagreement, as Gaichu considered himself not only perfectly functional, but even improved by his transformation, and so refused to do what was expected of him and went on the run. As before, all of our team are very interesting characters with rich backstories and companion quests to access. We simply need to take time to speak to them and indeed the various residents of Heoi in between runs. And since there's quite a few more missions in this game compared to Dragonfall, that means more story to uncover. And more story equals better game, right Arkham? You're a story first kind of gamer like you always say, isn't that right Arkham? This one's your favourite, right? Or have you found something else to complain about? So if you haven't noticed, all these games are text-based adventures with no voice acting. Little to no cutscenes, or even special animations that play when interactions between characters are happening. They're about as true to classic CRPGs as they could possibly be in that way, though even in those games characters had voice actors who spoke during the most dramatic moments, and emoted during combat and exploration. In Shadowrun however, text handles everything, including Games Master style descriptions of what characters are doing while talking. Now, no doubt the budget played a part in this. The moment you want to bring in fully voiced dialogue, you are literally adding to the cost of your game with every single word you write. And for a small studio making a crowd-funded passion project, that's not the kind of limitation you want to work with. Still, reading text isn't a bad way to play a game, providing you enjoy reading. Which I do. So, I do like a good text-based game, but damn does this game have a lot of text. Honestly, it felt like every single time I wanted to talk to someone, they just wanted to have the most intense philosophical discussions with me, or dump their entire life story on me in a single sitting. The developers even seem somewhat aware of this, as there are numerous conversations that give us a peace out and come back later option, or characters who offer a longer or shorter version of their exposition dumps. It's a lot, guys. One reason I prefer Dragonfall to Hong Kong is the pacing. Returns has too much combat and not enough story, while Hong Kong feels almost completely opposite at times. Dragonfall had just the right balance where I could hang with my guys in the base, shoot a reasonable amount of shit before they decided to throw a brick wall up in my face again, and then I could run off on a mission, explore a new area, make some interesting choices, and throw down with some bad guys. There are entire recorded play sessions of this game where I just spent my evening walk around Heoi, talking to everyone, trying to get all the story out of them. Now, don't get me wrong, it's a good story, with collective nightmares about demons and other crazy stuff, but there's just so much of it. Being something of a completionist, I felt compelled to check in with literally everyone between runs, and there were times where my heart sank a little when someone decided they had a new conversation thread to go down with me, because I knew I wouldn't be getting out of this anytime soon. Similar to Disco Elysium, take a shot every time I bring up this game. The text is presented in short, concise blocks with plenty of empty space beneath them, so each individual talking point isn't very intimidating. But when you've exhausted all the options with all the people, gone through all the bulletin boards, checked all your messages and so on, well, it does wear a guy down after a while. Is the answer to this voice acting? I mean, maybe. It doesn't have to be. Like I said, I think Dragonfall had the best balance here that let me cycle through all the different game elements at a good pace. I'm not for a second saying this is deal breaking, and maybe playing these 3 back to back had just worn me down a little by the time I got here. I'm just saying, it's not the best. So let's take a moment to check in with our big brother Duncan. This guy is complicated. He doesn't have a companion quest exactly, as his goals are our goals, so the critical path is where you find all of his stuff. Duncan seems to be in conflict with what might be thought of as typical orc nature. He's got a mean streak a mile long, and growing up in the Seattle Barrens gave him plenty of opportunities to let the devil out, so to speak. It seems his relationship with the protagonist was one of balance. Where Duncan was quick to anger and always chose violence first, our hero was the guy who could calm him down and direct his violent nature at his actual enemies, and not at whatever happened to be in front of him. You may ask, how did a guy like that wind up working in law enforcement? And to that I'd say, have you seen law enforcement? As already discussed, Lone Star is a for-hire security contractor whose main goal is to serve the needs of the powerful corporations who hold the purse strings. Any benefit their Enclave wage slaves get from that in terms of public safety is purely circumstantial. Still, they are an organized military force with rules, ranks, and training, which is exactly what Duncan needed. Rather than repressing his demons, he simply needs to find a way to channel them towards something seemingly constructive. Given Duncan's initial reaction to burning his sin and becoming a Shadowrunner, I suspect he held some idea that he was in some way helping people by stopping criminals and other dangerous predators. His partner Carter seemed to have taken over the protagonist's job of pulling the leash and either getting him to calm down or directing that fury of his at something more deserving of it. When I told him I'd been locked up in a corporate black site, he was disappointed to say the least. But he didn't get too holier than thou about it. A big part of Duncan's character arc though is his relationship with Raymond, which we'll talk about more when we cover the endgame. So let's get to know our girls Isobel and Gobbet first. The New Walled City was a low-income housing project that was actually supposed to help refugees get on their feet and start a new life. The money for this was handed over to a contractor called the Tsang Corporation, and sometime after the completion of the city, it turned into a crime-ridden slum even worse than the original walled city. Isobel is one of the few people to ever really escape from the city thanks to the help of her friend Gobbet. Given that Raymond wanted us to go in there with him, it seems like she might have useful information. The major problem there is she actually had a big chunk of her memories locked up. She has some interesting insights into life in the slum, how things are only bad in a regular way on the outskirts, with the triads using violence to keep everyone in line, but getting pushed deeper into the heart of the slum was something of a fate worse than death. Isobel, like most Deckers, prefers to spend her time as pure consciousness in cyberspace. She's not too good at opening up or being in any way social. Her big fetish is bashing together more dated second-hand hardware into her own supercomputer. It's her way of avoiding paying the corps for their tech and falling into the trap of constantly burning through cash to stay ahead of the competition. Her companion quest takes place during a Decker convention, where we are required to blend in with a bunch of Matrix jockeys, despite not knowing a damn thing about it. There's also this hilarious message conversation about what seems to be a haunted noodle machine somewhere in the building. After this, we are able to gain access to the memories she locked up, only to have her come just shy of a full mental breakdown when all the horror she experienced in her childhood comes flooding back all at once. Later in the game, she even says she wants the memories gone for good this time. It's a pretty interesting conundrum. In the end, our memories form a part of who we are. While we are not the people we were in the past, we are continuous with them, with our memories, hopefully, helping us make better decisions in the future. A problem like this might lead one to ask,
what can change the nature of a man?
But we do not have time for that rabbit hole today. Go watch Grimbeard's take on it or something. Still, I ultimately counseled her to keep her past and deal with it. I'm not a man with a dark, tormented history, but I've done some stupid stuff, that's for sure. Even so, my whole journey is what has led me to where I am now, and that's a place I'm happy with. Gobbet is our surprisingly young orc shaman. Despite her age though, she's already got quite a lot of experience under her belt, and decides to regale us with tales of her exploits. Very specifically, the missions she went on that went spectacularly wrong, as a way to educate us on shadowrunning. She comes off as quite impulsive and gung-ho in this regard, and we always find her in the process of cooking or eating something rather questionable when we bump into her. She's survived by trusting her gut and rolling with the punches, and has already outlived several of her old teammates up to this point. While Isobel has turned her room into some kind of retro-futuristic synthwave dream, Gobbet's room seems like that of a disorganized student who hasn't figured out that her clothes don't magically fold themselves and jump back into her drawers when she leaves for one of her adventures. Unlike the other characters, Gobbett's companion quest initiates when she disappears from our homestead in Haoi. Remember that impulsiveness I was talking about? Well, combine that with some shamanic mojo that was sending her bad vibes about her old home, and you've got a recipe for disaster. As she explains, her old home is a kind of flotilla full of disused shipping containers that she and some other followers of the Rat Totem turned into a kind of squat. This place had probably belonged to a Shadowrunner prior to their arrival, and was riddled with booby traps that took quite some time to disable. However, it eventually developed into its own community of outcasts trying to etch out some kind of existence. Gobbett and a few other misfits basically took to bringing in the rent by running the shadows, and their last big run revolved around stealing a shiny object. Basically a snatch and grab of a magical artifact from a sorcerer. The gist is that the run went about as bad as it could have gone, and in an act of sheer genius or stupidity, Gobbett and her shamanic friend got the idea to use the shiny thing to do whatever it does without knowing what that was. The resulting slaughter and feasting still haunts her to this day, and she split from the group and went her own way not long after that. Even so, she knows that thing is still in her old home, and oh boy do we see some truly dark stuff when we get there. I like that despite outward appearances, Gobbett is anything but a damsel in distress, even at this moment. In fact, she's the one who saves us from an ambush that nearly leaves us at the bottom of a hole, with broken legs and hungry rats looking to feast on us. Still, we give her options. Her original plan was to scuttle the flotilla and let the cursed thing and everyone in it drown at the bottom of the bay. However, with her team at her back, she's able to organize an insurrection of sorts, and we can break into the heart of the ship and find... This world is so messed up. I'm not sure if I like Gobbett quite as much as Glory, and this video is already long enough without me introducing a segue for who is the best Shadowrun waifu. Especially because none of these girls hold a candle to Dante's cuteness. Look at your silly face, you're such a good boy. So that's the girls. What about the boys? Well, Ractor is a very cool customer. Found in the basement of our home, he's basically a solo operative. He's incredibly pragmatic though, and sees our protagonist as a suitable business partner. He's an ex-corpo robot engineer from Russia, and his magnum opus is his personal battle drone, Korsechi. The word means deathless, and is something that can be found in Slavic folklore. Essentially, it's a person or creature that hides its death in an object, and in order to kill it, the object must first be destroyed. You know, I always thought this was overrated derivative crap, but the more I learn, I just can't even with this thing anymore. Ractor's been steadily improving Korsechi for years now, and has refined it into his ultimate weapon, an extension of his own mind and will. His reason for going freelance was because two of his former colleagues stole a bunch of his research, and he wants his chance at revenge. Given how into his work he is, you might think this is quite petty motivation to abandon corporate funding and resources to make your death machines, but the truth of that life is it's basically a prison anyway. Ractor, more or less, has his eyes set on achieving a transhuman state, and indeed, helping all humanity elevate itself above the frailties of the flesh. Due to an accident earlier in his career, he's actually more heavily augmented than Glory. But what about his essence? His humanity, empathy, love, real connection? So it turns out he never had any of that anyway. Ractor explains that he is in fact a psychopath, and has never been able to form emotional connections with other people. He can see practical reasons for having teammates and colleagues, and even see how their happiness can be a benefit to him, but he's always been something of an emotional vacuum, so going full Adam Smasher really didn't alter him at all. Our last team member to join up is Gaichu. We've already talked about his origins. We stumble across him while investigating a string of murders. It turns out Gaichu was hired to perform an assassination, and when he showed up to claim his payment, he was instead met by the Hong Kong Police Department. His employers thought that since he was a ghoul, no one was going to care. The plan backfired in a big way when the police failed to put down a highly trained red samurai who can now shrug off shotgun shells to the face, and Gaichu decided to make an example of his former employers. When all of this came to light, I was very much on the ghoul's side, and since the opportunity to bring him onto our team came up, I leapt at the chance. Still, his past is catching up to him. Through Gaichu, we learn a little about the 6th World Japanese culture, but also about the Red Samurai. These teams are so tightly knit that they seemingly function with one mind. They are limbs of the same body, all moving with exact purpose. Of course we are headed for a collision course with these guys, as Gaichu finally decides it's time to stop waiting for them to find him, and for him to choose the battlefield for their last confrontation. There is some conflict between the disciplined samurai and the ghoul inside, and this will affect how he deals with his nemesis at the end. Give him a clean samurai's death, or turn him into a ghoul and let him live as what he hates. So, we have another solid crew of awesome, well-written, interesting and layered characters. All of them are damaged, dangerous and halfway out of their tiny minds. And frankly, I couldn't think of anyone better to have my back given what we have to deal with here. So, as before, we have bills to pay and characters to overpower for a climactic encounter. The central part of Hong Kong, just like Dragonfall, is a selection of mostly disconnected Shadowruns that keep money in our pocket and our fixer Auntie Cheng happy while she chases down the various leads that we have. Most of these jobs appear in our personal computer, while a few others come from members of the HAOE community. Threaded between all this, we start to get a drip feed on the Kowloon walled city and something called the Prosperity Project. We also start to learn about other supernatural research that's been done on the city, and how the key in the area seems utterly corrupt and beyond saving. We actually have an early mission called Bad Key, that has us messing with the feng shui in an office building in order to transform the place into a magnet for negative energy, and the result of that tampering is quite volatile to say the very least. What is easily my favourite mission of all these though, is Exit Stage Left. The setup concerns a Tridvid, that's what they call TV in the Sixth World, producer who's desperate to get a star out of her contract and into his own stable of actors, so her adoring fans will tune in to watch his shows. He's hoping to dig up some dirt on his rival who recently suffered a nearly fatal accident, but not only did he make a full recovery, he did so in record time, even by the standards of the Sixth World and all its magic. What we discover by doing enough snooping is our Mark is now enthralled to what seems to be a very powerful vampire, who's looking to make a name for herself in the Hong Kong entertainment industry. At first glance, she seems like just any other enemy. She dresses up in black and declares herself the queen of the city. Defeating her in combat reveals quite the different story though. Far from being some centuries old eternal queen, she's just a girl who passed out at a rave and woke up with a new disease. We've all been there, I'm sure. The only problem was, this one completely turned her life on its head. She had to let her family and friends think she was dead, and just completely start again, and try to use the new gift she had to make something of herself. Our Mark isn't even enthralled to her either. He just seems to genuinely like her, and find her interesting. Worst of all, she can't even enjoy a steamed bun anymore without throwing up. I love this little subversion of the typical vampire trope here. It's just nice to see that in a world of cool cyborg magic stuff, being a vampire isn't all that great. Well, actually, none of this stuff is especially great. Sure, it's flash on the surface, but this isn't a world anyone should want to live in. What's also cool is that we can actually side with her and help her to finance her new startup. The only thing we ask in return is that she help us out with our own little problems and maybe look upon us as a friend in the future. She even comes to help in the final mission if we choose this path. There's a couple of other incidents of this actually. There's a whole team of runners who show up at the same time as us during another mission, and we lose basically nothing by letting them go and helping them to complete their objective. In return, they furnish us with aid during the final battle, and we get to look ourselves in the mirror at the end of the game and not feel like the worst possible kind of arsehole who walks these streets. So our critical path is dealing with the true identity of Raymond, a bold idea to actually make people's lives better, and how that got turned into an abomination that became too expensive to shut down, and so was simply walled up and forgotten about. Because that's worked out so well for, like, literally 0 people at this point. You may remember that I mentioned the Sang Corporation earlier on in reference to the creation of the Walled City 2.0. At the time, they were a relatively small contractor who got their first big break with this project. Since then, they've grown into a formidable corporation, with its chairwoman, Josephine Sang, becoming worthy of a seat on the Hong Kong Executive Council. An interesting point is that in her rise to power, Miss Sang betrayed a certain Kindly Cheng, and she is absolutely going to regret messing with my abusive auntie before the end of this game. A not insignificant amount of funding from the Prosperity Project was funneled into an experimental magic device designed by her son, Edward Sang. It was a kind of feng shui machine designed to funnel positive ki into the walled city and help the refugees better their lives. The return on this investment was healthy, happy residents who were paying their rent and bills on time, and a potential talent pool for the company down the line. As you can no doubt imagine based on our brief excursion into the city, things didn't work out as planned. To put it simply, the machine got stuck on something negative, and things proceeded to spiral down into literal hell from there. They were unable to turn the machine off, and Josephine was, for some reason, unwilling to blow it up. Now, if you've been listening, you may have put together that despite the fact this low-income housing project became a Triad-controlled slum, the Sand Corporation still had considerably improved fortune. These two things are not coincidences, and are essentially why the fortune machine was walled up rather than blown up. While the majority of the key entering the walled city was negative, there was a small amount of positive energy coming in, which Josephine was skimming off the top, and using to enhance her own fortunes, while literally thousands suffered in poverty. CEOs ruin everything. Since he wasn't able to do anything about it in any official capacity, Edward Sang fled Hong Kong and his mother to Seattle, where he worked in a shelter for homeless kids in the Barrens under the name Raymond Black. Suffice to say, Duncan is somewhat distraught to discover that the man he looked up to as his father was hiding such a big and dark past, and we have to make choices about how we deal with these revelations too. I opted to be the voice of reason and balance these two because frankly, we had bigger fish to fry. The pooling of negative ki went very toxic, and has paved the way for some kind of astral spirit dubbed the Queen with 1,000 Teeth to finally enter our world. Raymond had been working on this problem alone in the slums for a long time, and had hoped to venture into the walled city with the help of his foster sons and a team of Shadowrunners and shut the machine down for good. Of course, his mother has been waiting for something like this to happen, and once Raymond returned to Hong Kong, she sent a special operative to pick him up and bring him in so she could edit a few of his memories and create a son whose vision for the future is more aligned with her own. Yeah, it's about as messed up as it gets. My biggest disappointment here was the plastic-faced man. He seemed like he was going to be some cool mega badass similar to our orc in Dragonfall, but he's just an operative for hire who has a failsafe built into him that erases all of his client's data from his brain in the event he's caught. He doesn't even put up much of a fight once we've got him cornered, as even though we managed to corrupt the brainwipe program, we only slow it down rather than stopping it outright. Now, the final boss is so goddamn good, but they could have done more with this guy for sure. Speaking of disappointments though, we need to talk about rescuing Raymond from Prosperity Tower, because this mission absolutely infuriated me. Prosperity Tower has to be the single worst mission in the game. It frustrated the hell out of me and even led to me straight up using console commands to cheat my way through. After a fashion anyway. I certainly could have bullied my way through the mission without using the console commands, but it would have been a tremendous and boring slog the whole way. If this mission had been in Shadowrun Returns, I might have forgiven it, but we've had all of Dragonfall at this point, and in Hong Kong especially, there have been numerous missions that you can think your way through rather than just fight. At the start of the mission, we're given fake IDs to get in and a string of side objectives that are designed to help tackle the problem of the tower in various ways. I even said in the briefing that we'd keep quiet until we absolutely had to go loud. We need to disable several security alarms and also access data stored in matrix nodes to find the full code that lets us access the secret lab. The big problem being, our fake IDs might get us through the front door, but that's about as far as they'll go. No problem, I figure. Let's just play the game and see what happens. So I head down to the basement and get stopped by a guard. In the conversation there's only one high charisma check and some weak ass responses available, and choosing one of the regular responses immediately initiates combat. To survive the combat, you need to get into the security station by getting a keycard off of a dead guard, getting someone into the matrix, and turning off the alarm. Once combat initiates, you have 3 combat rounds to do this before infinite waves of backup show up. These waves will continue until the alarm is shut down. Seeing how far back into the level the objective marker was, I decided to reload and try a different floor. This time, I got lucky. I used Etiquette Shadowrunner to ask to see a Mr. Johnson, and got called into an office with a disgruntled VP who wanted some data hacking out of the servers. Cool, I thought, this'll help a lot. So I did the side gig, and then I was still left unable to access the security room. There was an office worker who required a Charisma 7 check to speak to, but otherwise, nothing. So that was it. Either I start shit here, or I start it downstairs. Have high charisma, or get fucked.
But Arkham, surely people who've spec'd into high charisma should be the ones with the options.
Yeah, sure. But those shouldn't be the only options. Even one of our first encounters in Shadowrun Returns has multiple options. The high charisma path here reduces the number of steps to your objective. It isn't the only option other than shooting the cop on duty. I actually wound up fighting security downstairs, and even got some maintenance clothes from a locker. Okay, cool. This should help convince the guards to let me pass. Nope. High charisma or fuck off. I have a hacker, but I can't upgrade my IDs, something I could do in another mission. There's no one I can intimidate, and wearing the uniforms does nothing at all. So I realized my options are fight lots of guards and go through the process of shutting down the alarms on all levels, or miraculously have high charisma. One of these options was going to be a complete slog. The other wasn't. So I bumped my charisma to 7 via console commands, got another side quest to get access to the guard station, and had to bump my charisma up to 8 to talk my way past the guards to the Matrix checkpoint. Again, no other opportunities presented themselves. Now, stop for a moment. Say I actually had built my character around charisma, but capped it out around 7 to focus on other things. I used the skill I've invested in to get into the security station, but because of one decision I made in my character build, I still have to fight all these guards before I can shut down the alarms. That is some badly designed bullshit right there. This game has been great at giving you plenty of options and making you feel like just because you have a certain build, you aren't locked out of things. But this was annoying as hell. To top it all off, if you did fight your way through every floor to get the codes, you then have a massive stand your ground battle at the end, while your Matrix runner works to extract Raymond from the machine. Now, you may have noticed that I haven't talked about Matrix running this entire time. That's because in Returns and Dragonfall, it's no different than any other combat situation. This is a perfectly fine system though, as you aren't expecting your players to learn any other skills just for these isolated sections. However, in Hong Kong, things are a little different. To start, you aren't immediately thrown into combat mode once you jack in, and you have to navigate through the vision cones of these tracer programs to your security gate. Getting caught or entering an area with aggressive ICE programs will initiate combat the same as before. Once you get to a security gate, you do have a little observation minigame to play that I found to be quite entertaining. For the amount of times you have to play hunting these codes, there's nothing wrong with it really, and you can always brute force the lock at the risk of raising the threat level if you don't really feel like playing. So yeah, this one is just straight up bad. I've forgiven so much from this series because of its budget and limitations, but this is just frustrating as hell. You know that meme about replaying a great game and then suddenly remembering that mission? Well, this is that mission, and unless I'm planning a high charisma build for a replay, this will probably be the point where I put the game down, or perhaps the thing that stops me picking it up again at all. So with the mask pulled off, the villains exposed, and a massive typhoon called Typhoon Usagi, that means rabbit, smashing into Hong Kong, we have to descend into the heart of the walled city, navigate a massive riot, fighting Sang private security and demonic manifestations from the astral plane for our final confrontation with the Queen with 1,000 teeth, and defeat her with the power of friendship. Friendship and guns. I have no complaints about this final mission or the final boss. Extremely cool all around. While we are able to overpower the shades of the Queen, the gate can't be closed from the outside. I love that Duncan is the first to step up here too. The man may be flawed, but he has the makings of a hero. In the end, Raymond enters the gate and shuts it down. His body and soul will spend eternity in a literal hell with a literal devil. While Raymond is, in his own way, responsible for unimaginable suffering, this doesn't feel like a fitting way for him to go out. The very thing from his nightmares came true, and he is lost forever. Well, theoretically, given infinite time, anything possible can happen. So if there's even the slight possibility that Raymond can escape this monster and tap the flow of positive energy to empower himself and return to the world, maybe there's some hope for him. But that will be little comfort to him in the here and now. As usual, we get an epilogue where we see the corporate propaganda machine working overtime to cover up this mess. When we wind up talking to a reporter about these obvious lies, he points out that, "The truth isn't my business, ad revenue is my business." And that single line should clue all of us into the fact that we live in the cyberpunk dystopia here and now. A lot of his other text about people buying the bullshit because they want to feel safe and have scapegoats to blame for their problems on also hits a bit too close to home in the modern day. Still, the mission is over. The great evil of the walled city has been destroyed, and now only the regular evils of corruption and poverty remain to be battled. Unfortunately, these are not battles we can fight with guns and magic missiles, which means for us, the story is finally over. My final note here is that Hong Kong received a multi-hour DLC called Shadows of Hong Kong sometime after its launch. I haven't played it though. I understand I probably should, but after finishing Hong Kong, I needed a break from this series. I had a bunch of games that I picked up over the holidays just sitting on my desktop waiting for me to play them, and I was interested in some of them for content. I figured recording the audio and editing the video was going to take a while anyway, so I could maybe at least dip my toes in to give this a try while I was editing. However, I've already moved on. My attention is elsewhere in another genre with other characters and different mechanics. Maybe if I tried, I could get into this, but it's just as possible that pushing ahead for the sake of completion would leave a bitter taste in my mouth. So for now, I'll leave it. Maybe I'll come back to it one day, but with all that said, I think it's time to wrap up this video. If this ending feels maybe a little rushed, please consider that I've been writing this script for a long time now, and the prospect of recording all this is quite daunting to say the least. Still, I hope I've done a good job of showing all of you what a wonderful set of games we have here. The story of their creation brings to mind the story of how Larian snubbed publishers and pushed to become independent so they could have the freedom to create exactly the kind of games they wanted to play. Likewise, when Wiseman was faced with having to beg Microsoft for money and create the game that the executives wanted, he found a way to simply cut them out of the equation and create the art he wanted, free from the constraints of the corporate monoliths. And I honestly can't think of anything more punk than that. Beyond Shadowrun, Harebrained Schemes have made a few other games, including Battletech, that received overall great review scores and even a few award nominations. For a time they were partnered with Paradox Entertainment, but after their last game, The Lamplighters League, got a tepid reception, they ultimately parted ways. About 6 months ago at the time of writing, Harebrained Schemes announced their next game called Graft. It's hard to say anything about it because the gameplay footage is very minimal, but it's got a grungy cyberpunk aesthetic, and according to its Steam page, is some kind of isometric survival horror game. And it kind of gives me Dead Space vibes in a way. If it's good, you'll be hearing about it here anything from 5 to 10 years after its release when I've cleared my backlog. All of these games have their flaws for sure, but they can easily be overlooked when faced with how good the writing and the art is, how rich and interesting the world and the characters are, and how gripping and entertaining their stories are. I spent most of my time playing these games, completely lost in the drama and the world, more so than I am in many a AAA game with all the graphics and no soul. In Dragonfall and Hong Kong, I cared about my teammates. They felt like real people to me. I wanted to strengthen my relationships with them and help them with their problems. And I was so fascinated by these mysteries that I just had to know what happened next. The art is very charming, the writing is sharp and witty, and there are moments in the combat that make you feel like an absolute badass. But don't take my word for it. Maybe you yourself should give these a try and take a run in the shadows. Just remember though, whatever you do, watch your back, shoot straight, conserve ammo, and never, ever cut a deal with a dragon. Well guys, that was a good time. There are more RPGs coming this year. I've got my eyes set on a large Final Fantasy VII project covering the original game, the remakes, and a lot of the spin-off titles too. Since it was my first RPG, it's a game that means a lot to me, so I want to do a really good job with this. It'll be a while before it's ready though, so in the meantime, I was thinking of something smaller, simpler. The Longest Journey is easily one of my favourite point-and-click adventure games, and that whole series was one of the most interesting for me to cover for this channel. It has its highs and lows, but the world and the characters were all wonderful, and I hope we get one more entry one day. Still, a comment that popped up frequently on those videos is, why not give Siberia a try? Or something to that effect. Siberia is another game that I slept on for reasons I can't fathom. I remember seeing it on the shelves in game stores back in the day and thinking, ooh, I should try that sometime. And then just not. And it's been sitting unplayed in my GOG account for ages. I actually decided to play it because, well, I'm making a narrative adventure game myself now, and I wanted to see what I could learn from these classics. Still Life is also installed and ready to go, thank you very much Avalanche Jared. Suffice to say, while these first two are shamelessly old school in the best and worst ways, I was absolutely charmed by them and really want to talk about them. So how about we wind up some clockwork automatons and board a train to the island of Siberia, where it is said you can still find mammoths. Hi everyone, and welcome to the end. If you've made it all the way here, then sit back, enjoy the train ride, and thank you for sticking with me all the way through. Given that I did all of my work on the Fatal Frame videos in winter last year, this is actually the first video I've cut together in 2025, and it being so big was more than a little intimidating. Still, I'm lucky enough to have a long spring break, so I was able to cut it together without going completely insane. I had a great winter vacation too, and I ran off to the snowy mountains in the north of Japan a couple of times, and it really is magical up there. I'm also really looking forward to the cherry blossom season that should be starting in a couple of weeks. Anyway, I think it's high time for me to sign off and go touch some grass for a couple of days. I appreciate you watching and staying to the end. Until next time my friends, thank you and peace out.